Hello guys, welcome to Percy Jackson. So in this video, we will see, what if Percy read the Naruto become the king of all universe? If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. The Spark and the Vow. The silence was the worst part. It had settled over Camp Half-Blood in the months after the final, cataclysmic battle against Gia, a heavy, suffocating blanket that felt less like peace and more like a held breath. The war was won. The world was safe. Percy Jackson, twice savior of Olympus, was a living legend walking among them. He was 18, and he had never felt more useless in his life. The adulation was a constant. Low hum he couldn't escape. Younger campers would stop and stare, whispering his name with an awe that made his skin crawl. He'd offer a lopsided grin, a casual wave, the mask of the easygoing hero he was supposed to be, but inside, he felt like a fraud. The fire that had driven him, the desperate, world-ending urgency that had been his constant companion since he was 12 years old, was gone. In its place was a hollow echo, a quiet ache for a purpose that no longer existed. He spent his days in the arena, the familiar weight of Riptide in his hand, a comforting anchor in the listless sea of his new reality. He trained the younger demigods, going through the motions of parries and thrusts, his body remembering a fight his mind could no longer connect with. He'd disarm a dozen of them without breaking a sweat, his movements fluid and economical, and they would look at him with shining eyes, as if he'd just parted the Red Sea instead of executing a simple flanking maneuver. He saw their excitement, their dreams of glory, and all he could think about were the faces of those who hadn't made it back. The price of that glory was etched into the back of his eyelids. "You're 1,000 miles away," Annabeth's voice cut through his reverie one afternoon. He was sitting on the edge of the docks, skipping a perfectly flat stone across the surface of the canoe lake. It ricocheted 7, 8, 9 times before sinking without a ripple. He hadn't even been consciously controlling it. She sat down beside him, her gray eyes missing nothing. The late summer sun caught the blonde highlights in her hair, and for a moment, the familiar sight of her was the only thing that felt real. She didn't look at him with awe. She looked at him with a knowing concern that was infinitely more unnerving. "Just thinking," he said, his voice flat. "That's what worries me," she replied, bumping his shoulder with hers. "You've been quiet since the victory feast on Olympus. You haven't been you. Maybe I don't know who me is without a world to save," he admitted, the words tasting like ash. He hated the self-pity in them, but they were true. He was a sword that had been returned to its sheath, and he was already starting to rust. Annabeth's hand found his. Her fingers were calloused from her dagger and from the countless hours she now spent rafting blueprints for the restoration of Olympus, but her touch was gentle. "You don't have to prove anything anymore, Percy. You've earned your peace." He wanted to believe her. He truly did, but peace felt like a foreign country, and he didn't speak the language. So when the summons came later that day, a shimmering, watery iris message that smelled of brine and ancient currents, he felt a jolt of something he hadn't felt in months, relief. The image was of a minor god he vaguely recognized, Palemon, a child deity of sharks and sailors, one of the countless distant relatives that came with being a son of Poseidon. The boy god looked panicked, his form wavering. "Cousin Perseus," he stammered. "A terrible thing has happened. My pearl of still waters, it's been taken. Stolen. Without it, the temper of the lesser sea spirits grows foul. The doldrums are churning, and the trench of lost whispers groans with unease." "My father," he said only you could retrieve it. It was, by all accounts, a milk run. A simple fetch quest. The kind of thing they'd send a newly claimed camper on to test their mettle. But to Percy, it was a lifeline. A reason to move. A reason to be the hero everyone thought he was. Annabeth stood beside him as the message faded. "The Trench of Lost Whispers. I've read about that. It's a nexus point, where abyssal currents from different oceans converge. It's unstable, unpredictable. Be careful. It's just a lost pearl, wise girl," he said, forcing a grin. "What's the worst that could happen? I'll be back before dinner." He gave her a quick, almost dismissive kiss, ignoring the worry that tightened the corners of her eyes. He needed this. He needed the fight. He dove into the sound, and the familiar, welcoming embrace of the ocean was the first true comfort he had felt in a long time. The salt water seemed to wash away the lethargy, and as he shot through the depths like a human torpedo, he felt the old power thrumming in his veins. He was Percy Jackson, son of the sea god. And he was finally going home. The Trench of Lost Whispers was aptly named. It was a scar carved into the deepest, darkest part of the Pacific, a place where sunlight was a forgotten myth. The pressure here was immense, enough to crush a submarine into a tin can, but for Percy, it was no more uncomfortable than a warm blanket. What was unsettling was the sound, or the lack of it. The cheerful clicks of dolphins and the mournful songs of whales were absent. Down here, the only noise was a low, pervasive groan that seemed to emanate from the rock itself, the sound of a sleeping world turning in its restless sleep. He found the pearl easily enough. It was nestled in the maw of a colossal, fossilized skeleton of some prehistoric sea monster, glowing with a soft, internal luminescence. It was the size of his fist, its surface perfectly smooth, radiating a profound sense of calm that was utterly alien to the oppressive atmosphere of the trench. This was the source of the problem. The pearl's serene energy was being stifled, suffocated by a presence that felt like static against his divine senses. It was a wrongness, a cold, predatory intelligence did not belong in his father's domain. As his fingers closed around the pearl, the darkness in the trench coalesced. It wasn't a monster he recognized from any myth. It had no definite shape, appearing as a vortex of shadow and shimmering, oily flesh, studded with dozens of pale, unblinking eyes. It was a thing born of the crushing blackness, an abyssal horror that had festered in the deep since before the Titans first reigned. It moved with a sickening, unnatural fluidity, and when it attacked, it didn't lunge or bite. It simply reached. Tendrils of solidified shadow shot out, and Percy reacted on pure instinct. Riptide was in his hand, a bronze gleam in the crushing dark, and he sliced through the appendages. They dissolved into black mist, but more immediately took their place. He uncapped the pearl, and its calming aura pulsed outwards, causing the creature to recoil with a silent, psychic scream that vibrated through the water and rattled his teeth. He used the momentary reprieve to press his attack. He was in his element, a demigod of the sea fighting in its deepest heart. He summoned a whirlpool, a vortex of currents that should have torn the creature to shreds. But it was like trying to punch smoke. The creature's form destabilized, flowing through the raging water as if it were nothing, and then reformed directly behind him. Before he could turn, a tendril slammed into his side. The pain was immediate and absolute. It wasn't a cut or a puncture. It was a soul-deep cold, a venomous energy that bypassed his skin and sank directly into his being. His connection to the ocean, the constant, life-sustaining flow of power he took for granted, sputtered and dimmed like a faulty light bulb. His strength fled him in a nauseating rush. The water around him suddenly felt heavy. The pressure no longer a comfort but a crushing weight. He cried out, a strangled gasp of bubbles. His blood, where the tendril had touched him, was turning a sickly, dark gray in the water. Necrosis. It was eating him from the inside out, devouring his divine essence. He stabbed wildly behind him with Riptide, and the blade met resistance. The creature shrieked again, its shadowy form flickering violently. He kicked away, his movements sluggish, his mind reeling from the shock. He had to get away. He had to get the pearl to the surface. He clutched the glowing orb to his chest. And willed the currents to carry him upwards, but his control was weak, faltering. The creature pursued, its multitude of eyes glowing with a malevolent hunger. It knew he was wounded, crippled. He fought with the desperation of a cornered animal. He blasted it with pressurized water, created explosive steam vents from the ocean floor, but nothing worked for long. Every counterattack drained more of his fading strength. The venom was spreading, a spiderweb of icy agony moving from his side up towards his heart. He was losing. For the first time since his dive into Tartarus, he felt the cold, undeniable certainty of his own death. He was going to die alone at the bottom of the ocean, killed by a nameless thing while on a glorified errand. The irony was so bitter it almost made him laugh. As the creature lunged for the final time, its form solidifying for the kill, Percy did the only thing he could. With the last of his focus, he didn't try to go up. He went down. He slammed his ate into the trench floor and pushed off with every ounce of his remaining power, rocketing deeper into the abyss. He shot past the creature, the pearl in his hand flaring brightly, and saw it, a fissure in the trench wall. No wider than his shoulders. It wasn't just rock, it shimmered with a faint, prismatic light, like an oil slick on water. It was a tear in the fabric of the world. He didn't know what it was or where it led. He didn't care. Anywhere was better than here. With the creature's shadowy tendrils just inches from his back, he plunged headfirst into the rift. The sensation was of being turned inside out and squeezed through a keyhole. The crushing pressure of the ocean vanished, replaced by an infinite, silent void. Colors he had no name for streaked past him, and he felt the agonizing pull of 100 different gravities at once. His consciousness frayed. His last thought was of Annabeth's gray eyes, and the stupid, arrogant promise he had made to be back by dinner. Then, everything went black. He awoke to the smell of dust and time. The pain was a roaring fire in his side, but he was alive. He was lying on a floor of smooth, cool obsidian, and the air, he was breathing air, was still and sterile. He pushed himself up, his muscles screaming in protest, and looked around. He was in a space of impossible scale. A library, or a repository, that stretched into a misty, indeterminate distance. Shelves carved from the same black stone rose up for what seemed like miles, laden with scrolls, tablets, leather-bound books, and artifacts that pulsed with faint, dying light. It was a cosmic graveyard, a lost and found for entire civilizations. The silence here was different from the oceans. It was the absolute, profound silence of forgotten things. He looked at his side. The wound was worse. The skin was blackened and dead in a wide circle around the impact point, and the gray veins of the venom were now creeping up his chest. His natural healing ability was trying to fight it, but it was like trying to douse a chemical fire with a water pistol. It was a losing battle. He was dying, just more slowly now. He slumped against one of the shelves, the pearl O.F. still waters rolling from his limp grasp. So this was it. He'd escaped the monster only to die in a dusty interdimensional closet. A quiet, pathetic end for the twice savior of Olympus. He closed his eyes, a wave of exhaustion washing over him. He was so tired. Tired of fighting, tired of running, tired of being the hero. Maybe this was the peace Annabeth had talked about. Just letting go. As his vision started to tunnel, his questing hand, searching for some small comfort, brushed against something on the shelf next to him. It wasn't stone or papyrus. It was smooth, glossy paper. It felt new, alive. It hummed with a strange, residual energy, a faint echo of something vibrant and tenacious. His fingers curled around it. With a groan of effort, he pulled the object into his lap. It was a book, but not like any he'd ever seen. It was thin, brightly colored, and meant to be read from right to left. The cover depicted a boy with spiky blonde hair, a ridiculously wide, whisker-marked grin, and a metal plate on a headband etched with a symbol like a stylized leaf. The title was in Japanese characters, but below it, in English, was a single name, Naruto. He didn't know why, but he opened it. The artwork was dynamic, explosive. It was just ink on paper, but it felt more alive than anything else in this dead place. At first, reading it was just something to do, a final distraction from the cold seeping into his bones. He read about a boy ostracized by his village, a pariah who contained a terrible, destructive monster. He read about the boy's loneliness, his desperate pranks for attention, his unwavering, seemingly insane declaration that he would one day become the leader of his village, the Hokage, and make everyone acknowledge him. Percy kept reading. As he finished one volume, another would simply be there next to him, as if the repository itself wanted him to see the whole story. He didn't know how much time was passing. Hours, days, they had no meaning here. He was completely engrossed, living a second life through the pages of the manga. He saw Naruto's story not as fiction, but as a chronicle from another world, another reality that had washed up here like all the other forgotten things. He saw a world of shinobi who could walk on water and breathe fire, who fought with cunning, guts, and a strange internal energy they called chakra. And the story resonated with him on a level that shook him to his very soul. The burden of a terrible power you didn't ask for. He knew that. The fickle nature of those you protect, who could cheer you one day and fear you the next. He'd lived that. The constant cycle of fighting, of losing friends, of being expected to stand up and face the next world-ending threat with a brave smile. That was the script of his entire life. But there was a fundamental difference that hit him like a physical blow. Naruto chose his path. He screamed his dream from the rooftops. He never waited for a prophecy. He never asked for permission. He decided what he wanted and then dragged the world, kicking and screaming, into making it a reality. His will was a force of nature in itself. Percy looked back on his own life with a sudden, horrifying clarity. He had never truly chosen anything. His fate was written before he was born. The great prophecy. The prophecy of 7. He was a piece on a board, moved by the unseen hands of the fates. Serving the whims of gods who saw him as little more than a convenient, disposable tool. He was their hero, their champion, their weapon. But he was never his own man. The thought didn't just make him sad. It filled him with a cold, pure, and utterly unfamiliar rage. The quiet aimlessness he'd felt back at camp wasn't peace. It was the lethargy of a puppet whose strings had been temporarily dropped. He had won their wars, and his reward was to be put back in the toy box until they needed him again. No, the word was a silent explosion in his mind. No more. He would not be a tool. He would not be a pawn. He would not live and die by the threads of some ancient crones who had never faced a monster, never lost a friend, never bled for a world that was not of their making. He would build a new world. A world where people like him, like Annabeth, like Nico, like all the demigods who were born to be used and discarded, were finally free. A world where they weren't just pieces in a divine game. He would take control. He would set the rules. His eyes fell to the festering wound on his side. It was close to his heart now. The book talked about chakra. It wasn't a gift from a god. It was energy that came from within, forged from the union of physical stamina and spiritual will. It was yours. He closed his eyes. He let go of the sea. He let go of the distant, fickle power of his father. He reached inward, searching for the core of his own being. He found it. It wasn't a gentle tide. It was a hurricane, a maelstrom of stubbornness, loyalty, and a burning refusal to ever give up. It was the force that had propelled him through 2 wars, that had shielded his friends, that had let him walk through Tartarus and emerge whole. It was his will, following the descriptions in the manga. He pictured that energy. He molded it. He felt the physical energy from his cells mixing with the spiritual fire of his soul. It felt raw, painful, like striking a match on his own nerves. He gathered the nascent energy into a swirling, blue ball in the pit of his stomach and then, with a surge of focused intent, pushed it towards the wound. He expected a gentle warmth. What he got was agony. It felt like pouring molten steel onto his corrupted flesh. A guttural scream was torn from his throat, echoing in the infinite silence of the library. A brilliant, cerulean light erupted from his side, so bright it forced his eyes shut. He could feel the venomous energy of the abyssal creature being annihilated, burned away not by divine magic, but by the sheer, indomitable force of his own life. The pain subsided, leaving him trembling and drenched in sweat. He dared to look down. The wound was gone. The blackened flesh, the gray veins, all of it had vanished. The skin was smooth and unmarred. Not even a scar remaining. He pressed his fingers against his side. It was real. He felt whole. More than whole. He felt a new kind of power humming beneath his skin, a self-contained, self-reliant energy that was entirely his own. He had healed himself. No prayer, no nectar, no divine intervention. Just him. A slow smile spread across his face. It wasn't his old, easy-going grin. This was something sharper, more confident, more dangerous. He stood up, his body feeling stronger than it ever had before. The repository seemed to hum around him, the ancient dust stirring. As if in recognition of the change that had just occurred. A shimmering doorway, a rift identical to the one that had brought him here, opened in the air before him. His way home. He looked down at the manga in his hand. He carefully tucked the first volume into the back of his jeans, a tangible reminder of the revelation that had changed everything. A souvenir from his own rebirth. He stepped through the portal. He emerged into the cold, dark water of the trench, the pressure returning like the embrace of an old friend. But now, it was he who was the master of this domain, not the other way around. He held the pearl of still waters in his hand, its gentle glow now amplified by the faint blue aura of his own energy. There was no sign of the abyssal creature. It had either fled or been erased by his passage through the rift. It didn't matter. It was an insignificant footnote in a much larger story. The journey back to Camp Half-Blood was a blur of motion and thought. The rage had cooled, solidifying into a cold, hard purpose that settled deep in his bones. The questions that had plagued him for months were gone, replaced by a singular, monolithic answer. He breached the surfa, sea of the Long Island Sound just as the sun was setting, painting the sky in fiery strokes of orange and purple. He walked out of the water, not a single drop clinging to him, and saw her waiting on the beach. Annabeth. She ran towards him, her face a mask of frantic relief and simmering anger. Percy, where have you been? It's been 3 days. 3. I was about to rally the hunters and storm the Atlantic. I thought. She stopped dead about 10 feet away from him. Her tirade died in her throat. She was looking at him, really looking at him, and the worry in her eyes was slowly being replaced by something else. Confusion. Wariness. He hadn't changed physically. He was still the same black-haired, sea-green-eyed boy she'd known since they were 12. But the person looking out of those eyes was not the same one who had left. The familiar, restless energy of the sea was still there, but it was now underpinned by something deeper, something still and unshakable, like the calm at the eye of a hurricane. The lazy, sarcastic slouch in his posture was gone, replaced by an effortless, commanding presence. He didn't just stand on the beach, he occupied it, his very existence a challenge to the world around him. I'm sorry I worried you, he said, and his voice was different, too. It held the same timbre, but the easygoing cadence was gone. It was calmer, deeper, with an edge of a absolute certainty that sent a shiver down her spine. I got lost, but I found what I was looking for. He held out the pearl. She took it automatically, her gaze never leaving his face. Percy, what happened to you down there? He gave her a small, sad smile. Everything. He didn't explain. He knew she wouldn't understand. Not yet, but she would. He would make her understand. He would make them all understand. Later that night, long after the camp was asleep, he made his way to Olympus. The magical elevator in the Empire State Building took him up to the gleaming white city of the gods. Silent and beautiful under the starry sky, he walked past the grand temples of his father, of Zeus, of Athena, his footsteps echoing in the pristine silence. He didn't stop until he stood before a much smaller, unassuming temple of gray, unadorned marble. There were no grand statues, no roaring fires. Just a pair of heavy stone doors. The temple of the Moirai. The Fates. He stood before the closed doors. The source of the suffocating web that had controlled his life. He couldn't see the threads of destiny inside, not yet. But for the first time, he could feel them. He could feel their pull on him, on everyone. A billion glittering strings holding a billion puppets. He felt their cloying, deterministic weight, and he knew it was the single greatest enemy he would ever face. He looked away from the temple, up at the vast, star-dusted canvas of the night sky. He thought of Naruto, a fictional boy from a lost world who had taught him the most important truth he had ever learned. Freedom isn't given, it's taken. He made no grand pronouncement. He spoke no words aloud. He simply made a vow, a promise forged in the fire of his newfound will, a declaration of war against the very concept of destiny. My life is my own. My choices are my own. This world will no longer be your stage. The script is torn. The strings are cut. I will not be a hero in your story. I will be the king of mine. The vow settled not in the air, but in the cosmos. Somewhere, in their gray temple, 3 ancient sisters felt a tremor, a single thread snapping free from their loom with the sound of a discordant symphony. It was a sound they had not heard since the dawn of creation. The sound of a true, untethered will being born into their world. Percy Jackson turned his back on the temple and walked away, a king leaving his first decree. His kingdom was not yet built, his subjects not yet gathered, his crown not yet forged. But he knew, with a certainty that burned brighter than any star, that they would be. He would build his new world, even if he had to grind the old one into dust to make room for it. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. The First Defiance. The change in Percy Jackson was not a tempest, it was a shift in the sea level. It was quiet, gradual, and fundamentally altered the landscape of every interaction at Camp Half-Blood. He moved with a newfound economy of motion, a stillness that was more intimidating than his old restlessness had ever been. When he spoke, his words were measured, carrying an unnerving weight of conviction. He still smiled, but the easygoing humor was gone, replaced by a focused charisma that drew people in while simultaneously holding them at a distance. He became a magnet. Younger campers, those who had only known the stories, were drawn to his calm confidence. They saw a leader, not just a hero. Older campers, those who had fought beside him, were wary. They saw a stranger wearing their friend's face. Clarice Leroux watched him from the Ares cabin, her spear always in hand. "He's planning something," she grumbled to her siblings, her eyes narrowed in suspicion. "Heroes who win their wars are supposed to relax. He looks like he's just found a new one." She wasn't wrong. Annabeth felt it most keenly. The easy intimacy they had shared, the shorthand of 1,000 shared glances and inside jokes, was now punctuated by moments of startling disconnect. She would look at him, sitting across from her at the dining pavilion, and see the familiar sea-green eyes, but the mind working behind them was charting courses she couldn't begin to fathom. The night he returned, she had pressed him for details, but his answers were maddeningly vague. He spoke of being lost, of finding a new perspective. He showed her the healed wound, a miracle that defied all demigod physiology. But when she asked how, he simply said, "I found a way." He never mentioned the book. He knew, instinctively, that it was a truth too vast, too alien for anyone to accept. Not yet. The breaking point arrived on a sweltering afternoon a week after his return. A golden light shimmered near Talia's pine, and a chariot pulled by sun-drenched Pegasi descended from the sky. The driver was instantly recognizable, though he looked more weary than any of them had ever seen him. It was Apollo, his divine radiance dimmed, his face etched with the lingering memory of his mortal trials. He looked less like a god and more like a veteran returning from a war he had barely survived. He didn't make a grand entrance. He bypassed the big house, his eyes scanning the camp until they found Percy, who was instructing a group of younger campers by the sword arena. Apollo walked towards him, his steps heavy. The usual boisterous energy of the camp quieted as everyone stopped to watch the unexpected visit. "Percy," Apollo said, his voice lacking its usual poetic flourish. It was raw. "I need to speak with you." Percy dismissed the campers with a nod and faced the god. "What is it?" "A new one came," Apollo said, his gaze distant, haunted. "It came this morning, while I was driving the sun. It wasn't for me. It was for you." Gods didn't typically act as messengers for their own prophecies. But Apollo's recent experience as the mortal Lester Papadopoulos had changed him. He felt a kinship with the demigods he hadn't before, a shared sense of being a piece in a game played by colder, more ancient powers. He closed his eyes, and when he spoke again, his voice was layered, echoing with the ancient, inescapable power of the oracle. "The forgotten dead shall stir and rise. Beneath a crown of broken skies, a thread of heroes will unwound. Where kingless thrones on bone are found, the shadow drinks the final breath, to rule the silent realm of death." The words hung in the humid air, heavy and poisonous. Campers who had been inching closer recoiled as if struck. Prophecies were a part of their lives, but a new great prophecy so soon after the last one was unheard of. It was a death sentence. Apollo's eyes returned to normal, but they were filled with a profound sadness. "It's coming from the underworld. A disturbance. My father, Zeus, he has already been informed. A quest has been issued. He commands you to descend and quell the unrest." He put a hand on Percy's shoulder, his grip surprisingly firm. "Be careful, Percy. The fates, they seem angry. This feels different. It feels personal." Percy's expression remained unchanged. He listened to the words, processed the command, and felt not a shred of the old, familiar dread. All he felt was the cold, hard certainty of his new path. "Thank you for the warning, Apollo. I appreciate you bringing it to me yourself." The god nodded, gave him one last look of grim sympathy, and then returned to his chariot, ascending into the sky in a flash of gold. The moment he was gone, the camp erupted into a panicked murmur. Chiron galloped over from the big house, his face grim. "Percy, my boy," the centaur began. "Gather your things. We must convene the council at once and choose your companions. There's no need, Percy said, his voice cutting through the rising tide of hysteria. It wasn't loud, but it carried an authority that made everyone fall silent. He turned to face the assembled campers, his gaze sweeping over them, the fearful, the confused, the suspicious. I am not going on a quest, he announced. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the distant lapping of waves on the shore. Chiron's jaw worked as if he were trying to find words that no longer fit the situation. Clarice stepped forward, her expression a mask of thunderous disbelief. What did you just say, Jackson? She snarled. Did you hear the god? The world's ending again, and you're saying no. I said I'm not going on a quest, Percy repeated, his voice dangerously calm. I am not Olympus's errand boy. A quest is what you call it when you send a child to do a god's dirty work. A threat is rising in the underworld. Fine, I will deal with it. He took a step forward, his presence seeming to expand, to fill the space. But I will do it on my own terms. On my own timeline, not because Zeus commands it, but because I deem it necessary. The days of demigods being used as disposable pawns in the games of Olympus are over. Starting now, it was a declaration of war. Every single person there understood it. Chiron looked pale, his centuries of loyalty to the gods warring with his deep affection for the boy in front of him. Percy, he pleaded, his voice strained. You cannot mean this. This is treason. Zeus will not stand for it. Let him sit, Percy replied without heat. He's been doing it for 3,000 years. Clarice let out a roar of pure rage. You're a coward, hiding behind big words because you're scared to face another fight. She charged him, her electric spear, Maimer, crackling to life. She was fast. To anyone else, she would have been an unstoppable blur of bronze and fury. But to Percy, she seemed to be moving through water. He didn't draw a riptide, he simply shifted his weight, his left hand coming up to meet the spear shaft. The moment his palm made contact, a visible pulse of blue-green energy flared from his hand. It wasn't a shockwave, it was more subtle, more fundamental. It was a projection of his will. Clarice's momentum vanished. The spear's electrical charge died with a pathetic fizzle. She stumbled to a halt, her eyes wide with shock, as if she had just run full tilt into a mountain that had not been there a second before. He hadn't just stopped her. He had cancelled her attack. I'm not the one who's scared, Clarice, Percy said, his voice low and steady as he held her immobilized. I'm the one who's finally seeing things clearly. There is a sickness in our world. And it isn't the monsters or the titans. It's the crown. It's the idea that we must bow to beings who have proven, time and time again, that they are unworthy of our loyalty. I'm offering a different path. He released her, and she staggered back, looking at her dead spear and then at him, a flicker of fear in her eyes for the first time. Percy turned back to the crowd. This path won't be easy. To walk it is to make an enemy of the most powerful beings in our world. But it is a path to freedom. To a future we build for ourselves. I am going to the underworld to face this threat. Anyone who wishes to stand with me, to be a part of building something new, is welcome. But know this, if you come, you are turning your back on the gods of Olympus. He stood there, an ultimatum made flesh. Annabeth watched him, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. This was hubris. This was the fatal flaw of heroes stretched to its absolute limit. It was madness. And yet, it was also the most logical, the most Percy thing she had ever seen. He saw a problem, and he was creating a solution, consequences be damned. Her mind screamed at her to stop him, to talk sense into him. But her heart was terrified of losing him, and it whispered that the only way to not lose him was to follow. No one moved. The schism he had created was too new, too terrifying. Finally, a single figure detached himself from the shadows of the dining pavilion. Nico D'Angelo, his black aviator jacket seeming to absorb the light around him, walked to stand a few paces from Percy. His face was pale, his dark eyes burning with an intense curiosity. The prophecy mentioned the dead, Nico said, his voice quiet but clear. It's my father's realm. I feel the disturbance. It's cold, and it's angry. I don't know what you're doing, Percy, but you're the only one who seems to have a plan that isn't just, do what you're told. I'm in. Percy gave a slight nod of acknowledgement. It was all that was needed. Good. We leave now. He turned and started walking towards the camp's borders, not once looking back to see who might follow. He didn't need to. He knew this was a choice each of them had to make for themselves. Nico fell into step beside him. Annabeth watched them go, her feet feeling rooted to the ground, her mind a whirlwind of love, fear, and a terrifying, reluctant admiration. Percy had just thrown a gauntlet at the feet of the gods, and the world would never be the same. The entrance to the underworld was just as dreary as Percy remembered. They had shadow traveled to a tunnel in Los Angeles, the mortal world's ambient noise fading into an oppressive silence as they descended. "You've changed," Nico stated, his hands shoved in his pockets. "It wasn't a question. So have you," Percy countered. Nico had grown more confident since the war with Gia, more comfortable in his own skin, but he still carried the weight of his domain with him. "No, I mean it," Nico pressed, his dark eyes studying Percy's profile. "The way you stopped Clarice, that wasn't your water power. It wasn't divine. It felt like willpower. Like you just decided she couldn't hit you." And reality agreed. Percy offered a small, enigmatic smile. Something like that. Their journey through the familiar hellscape was different this time. Percy moved not like a trespassing hero, but like a visiting dignitary. The lost souls in the fields of Asphodel, normally a murmuring, aimless crowd, parted before him. They seemed to sense the change in him, the new, self-contained authority that rolled off him in waves. Even Cerberus, the great three-headed guard dog, whined and nudged his hand for a scratch, his fearsome growling reduced to a happy rumble. They found the source of the disturbance in a forgotten corner of Asphodel, a vast, gray plain where the ground was littered with the dust of shattered armor and rusted weapons. A legion of shades stood there, thousands of them. They were different from the others. There was a faint, martial light in their hollow eyes, a memory of a warrior's discipline. But it was twisted, corrupted. Their forms flickered with a dark, resentful energy, and a low, angry hum emanated from their ranks, a collective groan of promises broken and glories forgotten. "Who are they?" Percy asked, his voice low. "The Nameless Legion," Nico whispered, his expression grim. "Demigods, heroes, warriors from every age who died in battles the gods deemed unworthy of remembrance. They fought for minor causes, defended forgotten towns, died without prophecies to dignify their sacrifice. They were denied Elysium and left to fade here. Something is stirring them up." As they drew closer, Percy could feel it. A subtle, cold whisper weaving through the legion, stoking the embers of their resentment into a raging fire. It was an insidious influence, promising them vengeance, promising them chaos. It was the touch of Erebus. A single shade stepped forward from the legion's front rank. He was taller than the others, his form more solid. He wore the armor of a Mycenaean champion, and even in his spectral state, he carried himself with an aura of immense pride and bitterness. "Perseus Jackson," the shade boomed, his voice like stones grinding together. "The favored son, the pet of Olympus, have you come to offer us pretty words and empty promises, as your masters did?" "I'm not here for my masters," Percy said calmly. "Who are you?" "I was Protesilaus," the shade declared, "the first to leap ashore at Troy, the first to die for the glory of the Achaeans. My glory was to be eternal. Instead, I was forgotten, left to crumble in this gray wasteland while lesser men had their names sung for a millennium. We will have our due. We will rise and tear down the world that has forgotten us." A roar of agreement went up from the thousands of shades behind him. The dark energy flared, and the very ground of the underworld trembled. "Vengeance won't get you what you want," Percy said, his voice cutting through the din. "It will only earn you oblivion." Protesilaus laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "And you will be the one to deliver it. The god's lapdog. Challenge me, son of Poseidon. Let us see if your modern legend can withstand the wrath of the original age of heroes." He drew a spectral sword and charged. He moved with the deadly grace of a master warrior, his blade a blur of resentful energy. Percy drew riptide. The duel was titanic. Protesilaus fought with the perfected skill of a life dedicated to war, his every move designed for a killing blow. Percy, however, fought with a power the shade could not comprehend. He didn't just parry, he flowed. He used his newfound chakra to enhance his speed and strength, his body a seamless extension of his will. He didn't need to touch the water of the 5 rivers to feel its power. He drew on the ambient moisture in the stagnant air, forming whips of razor-sharp vapor to deflect and disarm. Protesilaus was strong, but he was predictable. He was a creature of rage and memory. Percy was a creature of pure, focused intent. He saw not just the shade's movements, but the flow of dark energy animating him. He saw the whispers of Erebus clinging to him like a shroud. He disarmed the ancient hero with a flick of his wrist, sending the spectral sword flying. Then, instead of a killing blow, he slammed the palm of his hand into the shade's chest. A wave of brilliant, sea-green energy erupted from him, not destructive but purifying. It was the same power he had used to heal himself, the raw force of his own soul. Protesilaus screamed as the clean, vital energy burned away the dark whispers that had clung to him for centuries. The rage in his eyes flickered, replaced by a stunned, weary clarity. He fell to his knees, his form flickering. Percy did not press the advantage. He let Riptide vanish and turned to face the now silent legion. He offered you vengeance, Percy called out, his voice resonating with power, making the very air vibrate. I offer you something better. I offer you a purpose. The gods have forgotten you. They left you to rot. They used you and discarded you, just as they have tried to use me. Just as they will use your children, and your children's children, in their endless, pointless games. He began to walk through their ranks. Unafraid, the shades parted before him, their angry energy subdued by his overwhelming presence. I am building something new. A world where our worth is not decided by prophecies or the whims of apathetic gods. A world where strength is used to protect, not to conquer. A banner under which no one will be forgotten. I cannot offer you Elysium. But I can offer you a war worth fighting. Fight with me. Fight for a future where no other hero will ever share your fate. Fight for a legacy that you will forge yourselves. Your names will be remembered, not in the songs of Olympus, but in the foundations of the new world we will build together. Join me, and you will be nameless no more. His words washed over them, a tide of pure, unadulterated will. He wasn't just speaking. He was imposing his vision, sharing his certainty, offering a cause so compelling it dwarfed their centuries of bitterness. One by one, the dark energy around them faded, replaced by the faint, steady glow of a warrior's loyalty. They knelt. The entire legion, thousands of forgotten heroes, knelt before Percy Jackson in the grey fields of Asphodel. A slow, deliberate clapping echoed from the gates of the nearby palace. Hades stood there on the threshold, flanked by Persephone, who watched with wide, curious eyes. The Lord of the Dead looked amused. Quite the speech, nephew, Hades said, his voice a dry rasp. Recruiting from my dead, that's a bold move, even for you. They were being wasted, Percy replied, turning to face his uncle. And they were being manipulated by an outside force. Something dark. You must have felt it. Hades's expression flickered. There are ancient things in the dark, Percy. Things even I prefer to leave undisturbed. You have quieted a rebellion that was about to become a significant administrative headache for me. You have also openly defied my brother. These two facts make you a very interesting person right now. I'm not your enemy, Hades, Percy stated. You're not Zeus's friend, Hades countered. And in the current political climate, that makes you a potential asset. Take them, your nameless legion. Let them be the first citizens of whatever new kingdom you think you're building. Let this be your first victory. Just know that when you declare war on the king of Olympus, the battlefield tends to get very, very crowded. It wasn't an alliance, but it was a clear signal. Hades was choosing to sit back and watch the show. For now, as Percy turned to leave, his new legion forming up behind him in disciplined ranks. Nico knelt by the spot where Protesilaus's defeated form had finally dissolved. A tiny, inky black residue remained on the ground, a puddle of living darkness. As Nico reached for it, it pulsed once, and a single, chilling whisper echoed directly in his mind, in a voice far older than any god. ... So begins the unraveling. Then it vanished. Nico looked up at Percy, his face paler than ever. Percy had seen it too. Had heard the whisper. He now understood. The prophecy wasn't just about him. The forgotten dead, the heroes will unwound, the shadow drinking the final breath, it was all connected. He had faced his first test. Not from Olympus, but from the true enemy lurking in the wings. He had won the battle, and in doing so, had acquired an army. But he had also put himself squarely in the crosshairs of a cosmic force that saw his new ambition not just as rebellion, but as an opportunity. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. The Architect and the Warrior. The return was not a triumph. It was a schism made manifest. Percy and Nico emerged from a slash of shadow near the camp's borders, the air tasting sweet and fresh after the underworld's dust. Behind them, in the space between moments, a silent legion waited. Their spectral forms invisible to mortal eyes but a tangible weight against the fabric of reality. They had barely taken a dozen steps onto the grass of Half-Blood Hill when the sky cracked open. Not with a thunderclap, but with the searing, ozone-scented rip of divine teleportation. Hermes appeared before them, his winged sneakers skidding to a halt. The usual mischievous twinkle in his eyes was gone, replaced by the grim, impersonal focus of a messenger delivering a death warrant. His caduceus was held tightly in his hand, George and Martha's snake heads both uncharacteristically silent. Campers spilled out of their cabins, drawn by the disturbance. Annabeth was at the forefront, her face pale, Chiron just behind her. They all saw the same thing. Percy, standing defiant, Nico, a loyal shadow at his side, and Hermes, the embodiment of Olympus's authority. Perseus Jackson, Hermes said, his voice stripped of all warmth. It was the formal, chilling tone of the divine court. By order of Zeus, Lord of Olympus, King of the gods, you are to stand down. You have defied a sacred command, meddled in the affairs of the chthonic realms, and incited sedition. He took a step forward, his eyes boring into Percy. This is your one and only offer of clemency. You will release the souls you have conscripted back to the domain of Hades. You will appear before the Olympian Council, lay down your arms, and beg forgiveness for your transgressions. You will accept any punishment deemed fit by the King of the gods. Percy's expression was unreadable, and if I refuse, Hermes's face hardened, then you will be declared Saker, an enemy of the gods. Your name will be struck from the records of heroes. Your life will be forfeit. Any who aid you, shelter you, or pique your name with loyalty will share your fate. There will be no sanctuary for you in this world or the next. You will be hunted. You will be erased. This is the will of Zeus. The ultimatum hung in the air, absolute and suffocating. It was a declaration of total war, aimed not just at Percy, but at the very idea of him. He was being offered a choice between submission and annihilation. Tell Zeus, Percy said, his voice calm and even, carrying to every corner of the silent, watching camp, that he is welcome to try. Hermes stared at him for a long moment, a flicker of something, disbelief, pity, perhaps even a sliver of respect, crossing his features. He shook his head slowly. So be it. With another crackle of displaced air, he was gone. The aftermath was a deafening silence. The choice was no longer abstract. It was real, and it was lethal. Clarice, from the door of the Ares cabin, spat on the ground in Percy's direction, a look of grim satisfaction on her face. A few of her siblings nodded in agreement, but others looked torn, their faces a mixture of fear and a dawning, rebellious excitement. Percy had not just defied the gods, he had survived the immediate consequence. He had made a stand, and in doing so, he had forced every single one of them to consider where they stood, too. He turned and his eyes found Annabeth's. The look on her face was one of profound, soul-deep terror. It was the same look she'd worn when he fell into Tartarus. He had promised her then, together. Now, he had single-handedly declared war on the entire world they knew, and he hadn't even consulted her. Her heart broke, and her fear curdled into a cold, desperate anger. Without another word to the assembled campers, she turned and strode towards the beach, her movements stiff and furious. Percy watched her go, the first crack in his newfound certainty appearing. He had accounted for the wrath of gods, but he had not truly prepared for the wrath of Annabeth Chase. He gave Nico a short, clipped nod. Keep them close. Stay out of sight. Then, he followed her. He found her standing at the edge of the surf, exactly where he had first emerged from the sea a week ago, a changed man. The waves lapped gently at the sand, a peaceful rhythm that was completely at odds with the storm brewing between them. She didn't turn as he approached, her arms wrapped tightly around herself as if holding her body together by force. Was this always the plan? She asked, her voice dangerously quiet. To become the new Luke. The words were a dagger, and they hit their mark. He flinched. That's not what this is, Annabeth. You know it's not. Do I? She finally turned to face him, and her gray eyes were incandescent with a fury born of love and fear. Luke thought he was saving us, too. He thought the gods were corrupt, tyrannical, and needed to be overthrown. He made speeches, he gathered followers, he declared war. How is this any different? You stood there and spat in their faces, Percy. You made yourself the single biggest target in the history of the world. The difference, he said, keeping his voice steady despite the accusation twisting in his gut, is that Luke was filled with hate. He was a pawn for Kronos, feeding on his bitterness. I'm not doing this out of anger. I'm doing it because I'm done playing their game. What game? She exploded, taking a step towards him. The game of staying alive. Of having a future. We were supposed to have a future. We were going to go to college in New Rome. We were going to build a life, a real one, away from all of this. You promised me, we were going to be together. And we will be, he insisted, his voice softening. But that life was never going to be ours. Not really. How long would it have lasted? A few years. A decade. Until the next prophecy fell. Until the next time a god needed a hero to clean up a mess. That's not a life, Annabeth. It's a leash. We'd just be waiting for them to pull on it again. A leash is better than a death sentence. She cried, tears welling in her eyes now, hot and furious. What you've done, it's hubris. It's the fatal flaw they write tragedies about. You've decided that you know better than all of them. That you alone can remake the world. That's how heroes fall, Percy. That is how they become monsters. He reached for her, but she jerked away. The rejection stung more than any divine weapon could. I saw a different way, he said, his voice pleading for her to understand. When I was away, I saw a world built not on fate, but on will. On the choice to protect the people you care about. No matter the cost. Everything I'm doing is to build a world where we can have that life you're talking about, a real one, a permanent one. A world where we are finally, truly safe because we are the ones in charge of it. Not them. And who put you in charge? She shot back, her voice laced with the devastating logic that was her greatest weapon. You just decided it. That's not leadership. That's tyranny. It's the exact same thing Zeus does. The argument hung between them, a chasm that seemed impossible to cross. He saw it as a necessary revolution. She saw it as a suicidal act of arrogance. He was trying to build a fortress to protect them. She saw him building his own gilded cage, surrounded by enemies. They were looking at the exact same future from opposite sides of a barricade. I love you, Annabeth, he said, the words feeling heavy, inadequate. More than anything. But I can't go back. I can't unsee what I've seen. I can't go back to being their puppet. I would rather be erased fighting for a future I choose than live a long life on my knees. She stared at him, her beautiful face a tragic mask of conflict. Her strategic mind saw the suicidal folly of his plan. Her architect's soul saw the appeal of building something from scratch. And her heart, the part of her that had loved him since they were kids, was shattering. She saw the boy she loved marching willingly towards his own execution, and he was asking her to help him build the scaffold. I can't, she whispered, the words choked with tears. I can't watch you do this. I can't be a part of it. She turned and ran, not back towards the camp, but down the beach, away from him, away from the impossible choice he had laid at her feet. Each of her retreating footsteps felt like a hammer blow to his soul. He had stood against the god of the sky and not flinched, but the sight of Annabeth running away from him brought him to his knees. He sank to the sand, the ears of his new legion and the threats of Olympus fading into a dull roar. For the first time, he felt the crushing, terrifying weight of what he had done, and the profound loneliness of the path he had chosen. He did not stay down for long. The pain was a whetstone, sharpening his resolve. Annabeth's words, her fear, didn't deter him, they clarified the stakes. He had to succeed. The only way to prove her wrong, the only way to win her back, was to build the world he had promised. He found Nico where he had left him, a silent sentinel watching the camp from the tree line. The shades of the Amelis Legion were a cold spot in the air around them. "She'll come around," Nico said quietly, though he didn't sound convinced. "I know," Percy lied. "But she's right about one thing. This place isn't safe for us anymore. Not for any of us." His eyes scanned the horizon, out over the waters of the Long Island Sound. He was looking for something, a specific configuration of currents, a particular song in the seabed. He closed his eyes, reaching out not with his divine senses, but with the internal, focused energy he now commanded. He felt the tectonic plates grinding miles below, the patient, colossal strength of the earth. He felt the immense, raw power of the Atlantic, a sleeping giant of kinetic force. The two were separate, opposing forces. But he was the son of the Earthshaker. He was the son of the Stormbringer. He was the bridge. "We need a home," he said, his voice low. "A fortress. A place they can't touch." He turned and began to walk, not towards the camp, but towards a desolate stretch of coastline miles to the east, a place of jagged cliffs and violent tides. Nico followed without question, the legion of shades flowing behind them like a silent, gray river. When they arrived, the sun was beginning to set. Percy walked to the edge of the highest cliff, a 100-foot drop to the churning, rock-strewn water below. The wind whipped his black hair across his face. He stood there for a long time, feeling the pulse of the planet beneath his feet. Then, he began. He didn't shout or make any grand gestures. He simply closed his eyes and reached down, deep into the earth, and out, deep into the sea. He found the point where his two inheritances met and became one. He took hold of that nexus of power and pulled. The ground beneath Nico's feet began to tremble. It was not the violent, random shaking of a natural earthquake. It was a deep, resonant hum, a vibration of immense power being brought under precise, deliberate control. Out in the ocean, a mile from the shore, the water began to boil. Not from heat, but from sheer kinetic energy. A vast whirlpool formed, spinning faster and faster, drilling down towards the seabed. Then came the roar. As a sound that was felt more than heard, the groan of a world being remade. From the center of the whirlpool, the seabed began to rise. It was an impossible sight. A mountain of black, volcanic rock, slick with primeval ooze and festooned with glowing deep-sea flora, breached the surface of the waves. It rose higher and higher, a newborn island being wrenched from the planet's crust. Waterfalls of displaced ocean cascaded down its sheer cliffs. The scale of it was staggering, a feat of creation that would have taxed the combined might of his father and Hephaestus. Percy was doing it alone. He wasn't just lifting the landmass. He was shaping it. His will was the chisel. Sheer, unscalable cliffs rose on all sides, forming a natural battlement. The summit flattened into a wide, defensible plateau. He drew on the moisture in the air, pulling fresh water from the clouds and carving deep channels in the rock, creating the beginnings of rivers and a freshwater lake at the island's heart. He didn't just raise a rock. He laid the foundation for a nation. The exertion was immense. Sweat beaded on his forehead, and his muscles were wire-tight with strain. A trickle of blood ran from his nose. But his focus was absolute. This was his power, not a gift to be borrowed, but a force to be wielded. This was his will made manifest. When he was done, he stood panting on the edge of the cliff, looking out at his creation. A new island, a dark, formidable fortress of stone and sea, now stood where nothing had been before. It was raw, untamed, and utterly his. By the gods, Nico breathed, his usual stoicism shattered. He was staring at the island, his dark eyes wide with an awe that bordered on fear. A sound behind them made them both turn. Annabeth was there. She must have followed them, keeping her distance. Her face was tear-streaked, but the anger and fear were gone, replaced by the same stunned awe that was on Nico's face. She looked from the impossible island back to Percy, and in that moment, she finally truly understood. She had accused him of hubris, of acting like a god. But this was something else. This wasn't the petty, prideful power of Olympus. This was the raw, untamed force of creation. It was terrifying. It was magnificent. And it was hopelessly, dangerously chaotic. Her mind, the mind of the greatest architect of her generation, began to work. She saw the raw potential of the island. She saw the strategic placements for watchtowers, the optimal layout for a citadel, the natural coves that could be turned into a hidden harbor. She saw Percy's raw, untamable will, and she realized, with a sudden, gut-wrenching clarity, what it needed. It needed a design. It needed a purpose. It needed her. She couldn't endorse his war. She couldn't silence the voice in her head that screamed this was all a terrible mistake. But she also could not abandon him to face it alone. If he was going to build a new world, then by all the gods, she was going to make sure he built it right. She walked towards him, her steps sure and steady. She stopped before him and, without a word, pulled a pencil and a folded piece of paper from her back pocket. She knelt, spreading the paper on a flat rock, and began to sketch, her hand moving with a feverish, inspired certainty. Lines became walls, circles became towers, a city began to take shape on the page. Percy looked down at her, a wave of relief so profound it almost buckled his knees washing over him. He knelt beside her, watching her work. "It needs a name," he said quietly. Annabeth didn't look up from her drawing. Her pencil strokes were clean and decisive. "Aegis," she said, her voice firm, reclaiming her role as his partner, his strategist, his anchor. In the old stories, it was the shield of the gods. A weapon of defense that was so terrifying it could rout armies. A symbol of divine power and protection. She finally looked up, her gray eyes meeting his, no longer filled with tears, but with a fierce, steely resolve. "This will be our shield." As dusk settled, the first to arrive were the outcasts and the forgotten. A few unclaimed campers from the Hermes cabin who had always lived on the fringes. The hunters of Artemis who had grown weary of their eternal, unchanging vows. A son of Nemesis who believed in Percy's cause. They came in a trickle, drawn by the news that traveled on the wind, a handful of brave, desperate souls ready to wager their future on Percy Jackson's impossible dream. They stood on the cliffs of the mainland, looking across the turbulent water at the EU Island, at Aegis, their first and only sanctuary. It wasn't just a fortress. It was a promise. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. Whispers from the Nile. Aegis rose from the sea, a monument to defiance. In the weeks that followed its creation, the raw, jagged rock was slowly being tamed into a home. Annabeth was the architect of this transformation, a whirlwind of focused energy. She moved across the plateau with blueprints in hand, her voice sharp and clear as she directed the Cyclops who had answered Hephaestus's quiet call to aid. The smith god, ever the pragmatist, had seen the value in a new, independent power, and had sent a handful of his best builders as a gesture of clandestine support. They worked with supernatural speed, their massive hands shaping stone and celestial bronze with equal ease. A central citadel, designed by Annabeth to be both a fortress and a home, was rising at the island's heart. Barracks, a forge, and an armory were already taking shape. Percy's role was different. He was the source. When they needed a freshwater spring, he would place his hand on the rock, and a moment later, clear, sweet water would bubble forth. When a storm threatened to slow construction, he would stand on the cliffs, and the winds would part around the island, leaving Aegis in an envelope of uncanny calm. He was the shield, the power that made the entire endeavor possible. Their population grew, a slow trickle of the disaffected and the brave. A daughter of Hecate who was tired of being treated as a magical utility, a son of Apollo who believed more in healing than in prophecies. A disgraced Roman legionary from Camp Jupiter who had been exiled for questioning the judgment of the Senate. They were a motley collection of outcasts, bound by a shared belief in Percy's radical new vision. They trained together in the shadow of the rising citadel, the nameless legion's spectral forms providing silent, expert instruction. Aegis was becoming more than a fortress, it was a community forged in rebellion. The first sign of a new kind of trouble came not as a threat, but as a curiosity. A lookout, one of the ex-hunters of Artemis with eyes that could spot a hawk on the wing from 5 miles away, called out an alert. It wasn't an Olympian war party or a horde of monsters. It was a single, impossible boat. It was a reed skiff, elegant and slender, with a high, curving prow and stern. It had a single square sail that was filled with wind, despite the preternatural calm that surrounded the island. And it was not sailing on the water. It was skimming across the waves, leaving a trail of shimmering golden sand in its wake. It moved with a silent, magical grace that was utterly alien. The island went on high alert. Bronze-clad defenders lined the cliffs, their bows drawn. Percy stood at the forefront, Annabeth at his side, her hand resting on the hilt of her dagger. The boat did not stop at the shore. It glided over the churning surf and onto the black sand of the beach, coming to a soft, silent rest. Two figures disembarked. They were teenagers, a boy and a girl. The boy was tall, with rumpled brown hair and skin the color of caramel. He was dressed in practical linen pants and a t-shirt. But he carried a curved, ivory wand in the shape of a shepherd's crook and radiated an aura of stiff, formal authority. The girl was younger, her hair streaked with vibrant purple highlights. She wore combat boots, black eyeliner, and a look of bored defiance, though her eyes, sharp and intelligent, missed nothing. Percy recognized them instantly from the one brief, chaotic encounter they'd had years ago fighting the son of Sobek. Carter, Sadie. Carter Kane raised a hand in a gesture that was both a greeting and a plea for calm. Percy Jackson, we had a feeling we'd find you here. His eyes flickered up at the half-finished citadel, the armed guards, the sheer, impossible existence of the island itself. You've been busy. We're not looking for trouble, Sadie added, her British accent sharp. Just a chat, though you've clearly got enough trouble to go around. Percy held up a hand, signaling for his people to stand down, but to remain ready. A chat? You came a long way for a chat. What do you want? They were led to the center of the plateau, to a temporary command center Annabeth had designed. She stood beside Percy, her arms crossed, her analytical gray eyes sizing up the newcomers. Carter did most of the talking, his posture as rigid as a pharaoh's statue. Our patrons are concerned, he began, choosing his words carefully. The House of Life in the First Gnome has registered a magical disturbance of unprecedented scale. An event that tears a hole in the established order of the world. He gestured vaguely at the island around them. This is the disturbance. Quote, Annabeth bristled. We're building a sanctuary, a safe place. You have ripped a landmass from the Earth's crust and created a sovereign territory in defiance of the ruling pantheon of this land. Carter countered, his voice losing some of its diplomatic calm. In our world, we have a name for that. Isfet, chaos, an act that weakens the fundamental structure of reality. Sadie rolled her eyes. Oh, do calm down, Carter. He's just saying the grown-ups are in a tizzy. Horus is flapping his wings, Isis is worried about the magical fallout. They see you as a rogue element, Percy. A big one. The order you're talking about, Percy said, his voice dangerously level, is Ma'at, right? Cosmic balance. Divine law. Carter nodded, looking surprised he knew the term. Exactly. It is the principle that holds the universe together. It is what separates civilization from the endless chaos. And who decides what Ma'at is? Percy asked. The gods, right. The ones who sit on their thrones and demand obedience. I'm beginning to think that what the gods call order is just another word for control. I'm not creating chaos. I'm creating choice. The words hung in the air between them, a perfect distillation of their conflicting worldviews. Carter, the vessel of Horus, the divine king, saw a sacred duty to uphold a system that had existed for 5,000 years. Percy, the self-crowned revolutionary, saw a system that was fundamentally broken and needed to be torn down. That's a dangerous philosophy, Carter said grimly. It's the same logic Apophis used. Don't you dare, Sadie snapped, her eyes flashing with anger as she turned on her brother. Don't compare him to the bloody snake of chaos. Percy's fighting for his people. He's not trying to swallow the sun. He's just trying to get out from under the thumb of a bunch of arrogant, interfering gods. Sound familiar? The tension between the siblings was a palpable thing. It was clear this was a continuation of an argument that had started long before they arrived. Familiar or not, it is a threat to the balance, Carter insisted, turning his attention back to Percy. We can not stand by and allow a potential catastrophe to unfold. The gods of the Duat have issued a formal decree. They demand a trial, a test of your worthiness, and of your intentions. Annabeth stepped forward. A trial? You have no jurisdiction here. Magic has no jurisdiction, Carter replied. Your actions have bled into our reality. The veil between our worlds is thin. What happens with the Olympians has repercussions for us. And vice versa. We have to know what you are. An agent of righteous rebellion, or an unwitting pawn of a darker chaos. He planted the base of his crook on the stone floor. I, Carter Kane, Eye of Horus, challenge you to a duel in the duet. If you win, we will accept your sovereignty and report to our gods that you are not a threat to Ma'at. We will remain neutral. If you lose, you will cease this rebellion. You will dismantle this fortress and submit to the judgment of our patrons. It was an audacious, impossible demand. But Percy saw the truth behind it. This wasn't a threat, it was an opportunity. The Egyptians weren't Zeus. They were offering him a chance to legitimize his cause, to gain a powerful neutral party, or even a potential ally, in his war with Olympus. A refusal would be seen as weakness, an admission that he was afraid to have his new power tested. I accept, Percy said, before Annabeth could voice the 100 strategic objections she was already formulating. Sadie grinned, a flash of rebellious delight. Brilliant. This should be fun. Carter looked relieved and terrified in equal measure. It is not fun, Sadie. It is a sacred right. He looked at Percy. Prepare yourself. We will open the way at sundown. As the sun bled into the horizon, Carter and Sadie stood on the beach and began to chant in the ancient Egyptian tongue. The air grew thick, heavy with the scent of ozone and dry sand. A shimmering doorway, a heat haze mirage of the entrance to an ancient tomb, formed between two standing stones. Annabeth, Percy said, turning to her. If I don't come back, you will come back, she cut in, her voice fierce. She grabbed the front of his shirt, her gray eyes locking onto his. Don't fight like a hero, Percy. Don't fight with honor. Fight to win. Use that thing you can do. The power you used to build this island. Don't hold back. Show them why they should be afraid of you. It wasn't just strategic advice, it was a plea. He nodded, a slow smile touching his lips. He gave her a quick, hard kiss, and then turned and walked into the shimmering portal. He stepped out of the real world and into a realm of pure, living symbolism. He was standing on a vast, golden barge sailing down a river of liquid starlight. The sky above was a deep indigo, filled with constellations he had never seen. On the far banks of the river, the silhouettes of pyramids and sphinxes stood against the glowing horizon. This was the duat, the Egyptian underworld, and it was breathtakingly, terrifyingly alive. Carter stood at the prow of the barge. But it was not just Carter anymore. A shimmering, golden avatar of a falcon-headed warrior surrounded him, the divine power of Horus radiating from him in waves. His eyes glowed with the light of a vengeful sun. Perseus Jackson, the voice boomed, a harmony of Carter's voice and the god's ancient power. You have challenged the order of creation. Face the judgment of the son of Osiris. He thrust his crook forward, and a word of power, a glowing blue hieroglyph, shot towards Percy. It was the symbol for bind, and as it flew, it unraveled into shimmering ropes of light. Percy didn't try to dodge. He stood his ground, and a vortex of his own sea-green energy erupted around him. The chakra, his internal will, formed a spinning shield that met the ropes of light head-on. They sizzled and dissolved against his raw power. Horace Carter was not deterred. He stomped his foot, and the deck of the barge dissolved into a maelstrom of golden sand, which rose up and took the shape of a dozen giant scorpions. They charged, their tails dripping with spectral venom. Percy's response was immediate and instinctual. He drew the moisture from the star-filled air, a feat that should have been impossible, and condensed it into a wave of black, icily cold water that crashed over the scorpions, freezing them into brittle statues. With a flick of his wrist, he shattered them into dust. The battle was a clash of philosophies made manifest. Horace Carter fought with the rigid, structured power of divine law. He summoned magical constructs, fired precise blasts of energy, and moved with the unyielding force of a king. It was powerful, direct, overwhelming. Percy fought like a force of nature. He was fluid, adaptive, unpredictable. He had no spells, only his will. He turned the Starlight River into grasping tentacles. He used his chakra to propel himself across the deck with impossible speed, his movements leaving green after images. Riptide was a blur of bronze, but it was his bare-handed strikes. Each one infused with a concussive blast of his own energy, that forced the divine avatar back. Still, he could not land a decisive blow. The golden armor of Horus was absolute. A perfect defense that repelled every attack. Percy knew he couldn't win a battle of attrition. The power of a god, even a channeled one, was immense. Annabeth's words echoed in his mind. Fight to win. He stopped his assault, taking a defensive stance. Horace Carter, seeing an opening, gathered his power for a final, decisive strike. A miniature sun formed at the tip of his crook, a blast of pure divine judgment. As the god prepared to unleash his attack, Percy focused. He ignored the golden armor, the divine power, the glowing sun. He focused on Carter himself, on the mortal boy inside the godly shell. He saw the shimmering, symbiotic link between them, the channel through which Horace's power flowed. It was a river of energy. And Percy Jackson knew how to redirect rivers. He didn't try to block the attack. Just as the blast of sunlight erupted from the crook, Percy moved. He unleashed a single, hyper-focused needle of his own chakra, not at the armor, but directly at that symbiotic link. It wasn't an attack, it was a disruption. A jolt of static into a perfect signal. For a fraction of a second, the connection between god and magician wavered. The divine avatar flickered like a faulty hologram. The blast of sunlight, losing its perfect focus, veered wildly off course, searing a black scar across the indigo sky. Carter cried out, stumbling to one knee, the divine power receding from him for a crucial instant. It was all the opening Percy needed. He was across the deck in a flash, the tip of Riptide resting gently against Carter's throat. The golden avatar of Horus faded completely, leaving a panting, exhausted magician in its place. Silence descended on the barge. The river of stars flowed on. Percy had won. He hadn't overpowered a god. He had outmaneuvered one. He retracted Riptide and offered a hand to Carter. "You fight for your world with everything you have," Percy said, his voice filled with genuine respect. "I can't fault you for that." Carter took his hand and allowed himself to be pulled to his feet. He looked at Percy, his eyes full of a dawning, shocked understanding. "You are not an agent of chaos," he said, his voice his own again. "You are something new." Sadie materialized on the deck, a wide, triumphant grin on her face. "Told you he was interesting." They returned to Aegis as the moon was rising. Carter Kane, his formal stiffness replaced by a weary respect, gave a solemn nod. "We will honor our agreement," he said. "The House of Life will not interfere. I will tell them what I saw here. Not a madman seeking to destroy the world, but a leader willing to build a new one to protect his people. Maud is the order of things, but perhaps the order is meant to change." As they prepared to depart, Sadie pulled Percy aside. "Just be careful," she whispered, her playful demeanor gone for a moment. "When we were in the duat, I felt something. A presence, deep in the oldest, darkest layers. It wasn't one of ours. It was ancient and cold and hungry. And it was pleased with the ripples you're making. It whispered that the best kind of chaos is the one that wears a crown." Percy's blood ran cold. He knew that voice. It was the same one he had heard in the underworld. Erebus. His rebellion, his defiance of Olympus, his disruption of Maat. It was all serving the agenda of a far greater, far more patient enemy. He had won a major political victory, securing the neutrality of a rival pantheon. But he had also learned that his war was being watched, and encouraged, by the primordial darkness that wished to see all worlds, all orders, all life, utterly and completely unraveled. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. The Price of Power. The victory over Carter Kane was a temporary reprieve, a single bat. TLE won in a war that was rapidly escalating in scope and complexity. The neutrality of the Egyptian magicians was a powerful strategic asset, but Sadie's warning had left a chill in Percy's soul that even his own internal fire could not completely burn away. Erebus. The name was a whisper of the void. He was fighting a war on two fronts, one against the established, predictable tyranny of Olympus, and another against a formless, patient enemy who cheered for his success because it served the cause of universal entropy. He knew his current power, as monumental as it was, wouldn't be enough. He could raise islands and defeat channeled gods, but how did you fight a concept like fate? How did you wage war against the primordial darkness? It was like trying to punch the tide. He needed more than strength. He needed leverage. He needed authority over the very rules of the game. He found his answer in the quiet, haunted eyes of Nico D'Angelo. They were sparring in the newly finished training arena on Aegis. Their movements a blur of celestial bronze and Stygian iron. Nico was faster, more slippery, a creature of feints and shadows, but Percy's raw power and preternatural senses were overwhelming. He disarmed Nico for the 5th time, Riptide's tip coming to a halt an inch from his throat. "It's not enough," Percy said, his voice low as he helped Nico to his feet. Nico raised an eyebrow, rubbing his wrist. "Felt like plenty to me. I beat Carter by disrupting a connection," Percy explained, his gaze distant. "I beat Protesilos by burning away an influence. I'm winning battles by being a better fighter. But the Fates, Erebus, they aren't fighters. They're fundamental forces. I can't punch my way out of a prophecy. I can't stab the concept of darkness." Nico grew somber, his gaze turning inward. He understood. He had spent more time than anyone grappling with the fundamental laws that governed souls and death. "So what do you need?" "A weapon that works on their level," Percy said. "Something that governs connections, vows, consequences. Something that binds even the gods." Nico's face went pale. He knew instantly what Percy was talking about. "No, absolutely not. Percy, you can't be serious." "The sticks," Percy said, the name itself feeling heavy on his tongue. "Every oath is sworn on it. Every god is bound by it. It's the one power they all have to respect. Where does it come from?" "It doesn't come from anywhere," Nico said, his voice strained with urgency. "It just is. It's a concept that flows through all the realms of our reality. It's not a revere you can just go find the source of and drink from. To even try." He shook his head, a look of genuine fear in his eyes. "It would destroy you. It would unmake your soul." "My soul is my own now, Nico," Percy countered, his voice resonating with the unshakable certainty that had become his hallmark. "I need you to take me there. To its heart, its nexus." The argument was short and intense. Nico protested, pleaded, and warned him with every terrifying story he knew about souls who had been utterly annihilated by the river's power. But he could not sway Percy's iron will. In the end, his loyalty to Percy outweighed his fear of the river. He knew Percy would try it with or without him, and if he was going to be foolish enough to attempt cosmic suicide, he at least needed a friend there to watch his back. With a heavy heart and a grim sense of foreboding, Nico agreed. They left Annabeth in command of Aegis, giving her only a vague explanation that they were seeking a new source of power. She didn't like it. She saw the fear in Nico's eyes and the dangerous, obsessive gleam in Percy's, and it terrified her. But she trusted him. She had chosen her side. Her role was to hold the shield, and she would. Nico led Percy not into the underworld, but into a place far older. Through a long, dizzying shadow jump, they arrived in a cavern of absolute, silent blackness. There was no floor, no ceiling, just an endless, non-reflective void, and flowing through the center of it was the river Styx. It was not the sluggish, garbage-choked river of the underworld. Here, at its conceptual heart, it was a torrent of pure, liquid potential. It didn't flow with water. It flowed with broken promises, with dying curses, with the weight of every oath ever sworn. Voices whispered from its depths, heroes vowing vengeance, lovers pledging eternity, gods making deals that would shape the fate of the world. It was a river of metaphysical gravity, and its pull on the soul was immense. "This is it," Nico breathed, his form seeming to shrink in the overwhelming presence of the river. "The nexus. Don't get too close. Its current can pull the very identity from your mind." Percy stepped to the edge. He could feel it. The river was a living entity, an ancient, implacable consciousness. It was the great binder, the ultimate enforcer. He knew what he had to do. He couldn't just take its power. He had to make a bargain. He had to offer it something of equivalent value. And the only thing he owned that was worth anything to a power like this was his own story. His own pain. "I have to go in," Percy said. "It will kill you," Nico yelled, grabbing his arm. "No, it won't," Percy said, his voice unnervingly calm. He looked at Nico, and his sea-green eyes were filled with a terrible, sorrowful resolve. "It will just take what it's owed." He shook off Nico's hand and stepped into the current. The shock was not of cold, but of memory. The moment the river touched him, his life flashed before his eyes. Not as a highlight reel, but as a litany of his deepest failures. He was 12 again, standing helpless as his mother dissolved into golden light in the Minotaur's grip. The crushing guilt, the childish rage, He felt it all with the searing intensity of the first time. The river fed on the emotion, on the broken promise of a son to protect his mother. He was on the quest to save Artemis. Watching Bianca D'Angelo sacrifice herself to defeat a defective Talos automaton. He felt Nico's agonizing scream of loss, the weight of his own promise to keep her safe shattering into a million pieces. The river drank his failure, savoring the bitter taste of a hero's broken word. He was on Olympus, fighting Luke, his friend, his brother in all but blood. He saw the flicker of the real Luke in his eyes. Begging for help, begging for death. He felt the weight of Annabeth's grief, the terrible sense that he could have done more, said more, fought harder to save him sooner. He was in Tartarus, the air like glass shards in his lungs, the ground a living, malevolent body beneath his feet. He felt the abject, soul-crushing terror, the despair that was so absolute it was almost a physical presence. He relived the moment he was forced to let go of Bob, the titan who had remembered his name, his friend, consigning him to an eternity of torment to ensure his and Annabeth's escape. The river was stripping him bare, feasting on the agony of his past. It was a conscious, predatory act. It wanted to drown him in his own regret, to unmake him with the weight of his own history. Most souls would have dissolved, their identities shredded by the sheer force of the pain. But Percy did not fight it. He did not struggle. He let it happen. He willingly, consciously, offered the memories up. He gave the river his pain. Not as a victim, but as a payment. Take it, his thoughts screamed into the torrent. Take the guilt. Take the failure. Take the promises I couldn't keep. Re the price I pay for the power to keep the ones I'm making now. It was an act of profound, agonizing self-sacrifice. He wasn't just remembering the pain, he was relinquishing it, letting the very essence of those defining moments be consumed by the river. A part of him was being erased, burned away in exchange for something new. The torrent of memories slowed. The river's hunger was sated. A new understanding flooded Percy's mind. He saw the universe not as a collection of places and people, but as a vast, interconnected web of vows, loyalties, and consequences. He could see the shimmering threads of oaths that connected a god to their worshipper, a king to his subjects, a hero to his fatal flaw. And he felt, with a terrifying, absolute clarity, that he could now reach out and touch those threads. He could strengthen them, weaken them, or cut them entirely. He stumbled out of the river and collapsed on the non-existent shore, gasping. He was pale, trembling, and looked hollowed out, as if a fundamental part of his being had been scooped out. But his eyes burned with a new and terrible light. "Percy," Nico whispered, rushing to his side. "Are you?" Percy looked at him, and for a moment, he didn't seem to recognize his friend. He saw only the faint, shimmering oath of loyalty Nico had sworn to him, and the old, faded thread of a childhood promise he had made to his sister, Bianca. Then his focus returned. "I'm here, Nico. I'm changed." He stood up, his unsteadiness vanishing. He no longer felt the familiar ache of his old failures. The guilt over Bianca, over Luke, over Bob, it was gone. The memory was there, a cold, hard fact, but the emotional weight, the pain that had been a part of him for years, had been sacrificed to the river. He had paid the price. Their return to Aegis was instantaneous. One moment they were in the void, the next they were standing on the central plateau of the island. And they had returned to an island under siege. While they were gone, the fates had made their move. They had not sent an army of gods. They had done something cruder, more direct. They had opened a rift to the deepest pits of Tartarus, a gaping wound in the air above the island from which a legion of monsters was pouring forth. Hellhounds the size of bulldozers, flocks of screeching harpies, lumbering Laestrygonian giants, a chaotic, overwhelming G-force designed to drown the fledgling nation in blood and claws. Annabeth was a brilliant commander. She had organized the defenders into efficient, deadly phalanxes. The ex-hunters rained down OWS from the battlements of the half-finished citadel. The Roman legionary led a disciplined shield wall that held back a tide of hellhounds. But they were hopelessly outnumbered. For every monster they cut down, 3 more took its place. The assault was relentless, a tide of mindless fury. Percy took in the scene in an instant. The chaos, the fear in the eyes of his people, the shrieks of the dying monsters. He saw the shimmering thread of command Zeus had given the Fates, and the Fates, will being imposed on the creatures of Tartarus. He raised a hand. He did not summon a wave. He did not call down lightning. He reached out with his new, terrifying sense and took hold of the metaphysical concept that bound these creatures to existence. They were born of Tartarus, defined by chaos and divine hatred. They were walking, breathing curses, and Percy Jackson was now the master of all curses, all bonds, all consequences. He clenched his fist. He spoke a single word, not with his mouth, but with his will. A command that echoed across the conceptual plane. Unmake. The effect was instantaneous and absolute. A wave of invisible, silent energy washed over the island. It was not destructive. It was an act of cosmic negation. A Laestrygonian giant, its club raised to smash through a shield wall, simply ceased. Its form didn't dissolve or explode. It unraveled, its very essence. Being erased from reality like a line of code being deleted. A flock of harpies, screeching as they dove towards the defenders, vanished mid-flight, leaving behind nothing but the memory of their shriek. The entire invading army, thousands of monsters, was gone in the space of a single heartbeat. Wiped from the slate of existence. Silence fell over the battlefield, broken only by the wind and the shocked, ragged gasps of the defenders. They stared at the empty spaces where their enemies had been moments before, their minds unable to process what they had just witnessed. They had been prepared for a battle. This was an execution. Annabeth lowered her dagger, her knuckles white. She looked from the empty battlefield to Percy, who stood in the center of it all, his hands still raised, his face a mask of cold, hard power. She saw the change in him, the hollowness in his eyes where the familiar warmth and pain used to be. She saw the absolute, terrifying nature of the power he now wielded. He had won. He had saved them all with a single word. But as she looked at the man who had sacrificed his own history for the sake of his future, she felt a new and profound fear. He was no longer just a demigod. He was no longer just a rebel leader. He had made himself into a living law of nature, a force that could not just kill, but erase. And she had no idea what that would cost him, and all of them, in the end. Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6. The Olympian Gambit. The silence on Aegis after the unmaking was heavier than any monster's roar. It was a silence born of awe and a deep, primal fear. The defenders, mortals and demigods alike, looked at Percy not as a leader who had saved them, but as a cosmic event they had just survived. He had not won a battle, he had deleted the opposition. He very laws of reality seemed to bend to his will. Annabeth was the first to move, her footsteps unnaturally loud on the stone as she walked towards him. Her face was a storm of conflicting emotions, relief, pride, and a gut-deep terror that made her feel cold despite the midday sun. She stopped in front of him, her gray eyes searching his. She was looking for the boy she knew, the sarcastic, reckless, but fundamentally kind hero she had fallen in love with. Percy, she whispered, her voice tight. He met her gaze, and for a terrifying second, there was nothing there, just the calm, vast, and empty sea on a windless day. The hollow space where his most painful memories had been was a void she could feel even from a distance. Then he blinked, and a flicker of the old Percy returned. He gave her a small, tired smile. "I'm here, wise girl," he said, his voice raspy. He reached out and took her hand, his grip a little too tight, as if he were anchoring himself to her. "I'm okay." "No," she said, her voice shaking slightly as she squeezed his hand back. "You're not. I can feel it. What did it cost you? What did that river take from you?" "The weight," he answered, and it was the truest thing he could say. "It took the weight. Bianca, Luke, all the failures. I remember them, but they don't hurt anymore." He looked away from her, towards the horizon. "It makes it easier to think. To see what needs to be done." Annabeth's heart ached. He saw it as a strength, a necessary upgrade. She saw it as a mutilation of his soul. He had sacrificed the very pains that had forged his empathy. The grief that had made him so fiercely protective. He had traded his scars for a sword. "We need to be careful, Percy," she said, her voice dropping to a low, urgent murmur. "A power like that, it's not just about what it does to your enemies. It's about what it does to you." "I know," he said, turning back to her. His focus was absolute, his gaze so intense it felt like a physical touch. "That's why I need you. You're my architect. You're my strategist. But more than that, you're my conscience. You're my anchor. Don't ever let me forget that." It was the most vulnerable he had been since his return. A raw admission that he knew he was walking on the edge of a precipice. The fear in Annabeth's heart didn't vanish, but it was joined by a fierce, renewed resolve. He was still in there. And she would hold onto him with everything she had. The news of the failed assault and its incomprehensible conclusion hit Olympus like a thunderbolt. The reports, gleaned from panicked nymphs and terrified satyrs, were incoherent. An army of thousands, erased. Not defeated, not banished. Simply, gone. Zeus's authority, already fragile after the public defiance, now crumbled. He had used overwhelming force. The bluntest of all instruments, and it had been countered with an impossible, elegant finality. He looked not like a king, but like a fool. The fates, their direct approach having failed so spectacularly, retreated into the shadows of their temple, their silence more unnerving than any prophecy. They knew brute force would not work against the boy who could unmake reality. As time for a more subtle weapon, politics. And they knew just which Olympian's pride and ambition to sharpen into a blade. The message came 2 days later. It was not a formal summons, not an iris message. It was a single, perfect white dove that landed on the railing of the balcony outside Percy and Annabeth's chambers in the citadel. Tied to its leg with a golden thread was a tiny, rolled scroll of imperial parchment. Annabeth untied it, her fingers nimble. The note contained a single, elegantly written sentence in ancient Greek. "The king is weak. The queen sees an opportunity. A private audience is requested. Come to the gardens of Olympus at moonrise. Alone." There was no signature, but none was needed. The regal tone, the mention of a queen, the sheer audacity of it could only be one person. "Hera," Percy said, his voice flat as he read the note over her shoulder. "It's a trap," Annabeth said immediately, her strategic mind kicking into high gear. "A painfully obvious one. She wants to use you. She'll promise you anything, recognition, an alliance, a ceasefire, if you help her overthrow Zeus. She'll use you as her weapon, and the moment he's gone, she'll name you the greatest threat to her new order and unite the rest of the gods against you." "I know," Percy said, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across his face. It was the smile of a predator that had just seen the hunter walk into its snare. "She thinks she's playing a Game of Thrones. She doesn't realize I'm the one who gets to decide the rules now." He convened with his inner circle, Annabeth and Nico, in the war room. A map of the heavens and the earth magically projected on a massive bronze table. "It's poison," Nico confirmed, leaning against a wall with his arms crossed. "Hera's bargains always are. She's the goddess of family. And she's the most dysfunctional family member in history. She'll use your rebellion as a pretext for a coup she's wanted for centuries." "Exactly," Percy said, "and we're going to let her. I'm going to accept her invitation." Annabeth looked up from the map, her gray eyes narrowed. "You're going to walk into her trap." "It's not her trap anymore," Percy replied, his finger tapping the glowing representation of Mount Olympus. "It's my stage. She's just provided the audience. She wants to use my defiance to fracture the council. Good. I want to shatter it completely. I'm not going there to whisper in the gardens with Hera. I'm going to walk into the throne room and declare a civil war." The sheer, breathtaking audacity of the plan silenced them both. He wasn't just reacting to the gods' moves anymore. He was seizing the initiative, turning their own internal politics against them on a scale they couldn't possibly anticipate. This was the Olympian gambit. Percy arrived on Olympus alone. He didn't ride a Pegasus or use a secret entrance. He walked out of the magical elevator in the Empire State Building and strode through the golden streets of the divine city as if he owned them. The minor gods and nature spirits who saw him scurried away, their faces pale with fear and awe. He was no longer just a powerful demigod, he was a rogue state, a walking declaration of war. And his presence on their sacred mountain was the ultimate act of defiance. He ignored the path to the gardens and walked directly to the massive, gleaming doors of the throne room. They swung open before him. And he stepped inside. The full Olympian Council was assembled, though they were not in session. They were scattered around the room in tense, argumentative clusters. Zeus sat on his throne, the master bolt crackling in his hand, his face a mask of thunderous fury. Hera was on her own throne, a look of smug triumph on her face, believing her pawn had arrived on schedule. Ares was sharpening a knife, a bloody grin on his face, clearly hoping for a fight. Apollo looked troubled, while Artemis watched Percy with cold, calculating eyes. Only Hestia, tending the central hearth, seemed calm. Her fiery eyes filled with an ancient, sorrowful wisdom. "Perseus Jackson," Hera began, her voice smooth as silk. "You came. I am pleased to see you have recognized the wisdom of my. I'm not here for you, Hera," Percy cut in, his voice ringing with a calm authority that silenced the entire room. He walked to the center of the chamber, directly before the hearth, and turned to face them all. "I'm not here to be your dagger in the dark. I received your pathetic invitation to treason, and I came to give you all my answer." Hera's smug expression dissolved into shock, then outrage. Zeus leaned forward on his throne, his knuckles white. "You came here to die, boy," Zeus growled, his voice the rumble of a gathering storm. "I came here to show you the truth," Percy countered. He held up a hand, not in a gesture of attack, but to command their attention. And then he unleashed the power of the sticks. It was not a wave of force. It was a wave of revelation. As he began to speak, the very air in the throne room grew heavy, saturated with the conceptual weight of broken vows. "You demand loyalty," he said, his gaze sweeping over them, "but you are a council of oath breakers." He looked at Ares. "You swore an oath of fealty to your father, yet you've plotted with other war gods behind his back, seeking to expand your own influence. I can see the bitter taste of your broken word." A faint, blood-red thread of energy shimmered around the god of war, visible to all. Ares recoiled, his hand going to his sword. He turned to Apollo. "You swore on the saint. YX to honor the sacrifices made during your trials as a mortal, yet you have allowed the memories to fade, slipping back into the comfort of your divinity. The vows you made to your mortal friends are gathering dust." A pale, sun-gold cord around Apollo's wrist pulsed with a sorrowful light. The god looked down at it, his face stricken. One by one, he exposed them. He spoke of Demeter's secret pacts with primordial earth spirits, of Hephaestus's quiet deals with the Cyclops to build weapons Olympus would never approve of Dionysus's broken promises to his followers. He laid bare the web of petty betrayals, of convenient lies, of solemn oaths sworn in passion and abandoned in boredom that underpinned their entire divine society. Finally, his eyes landed on Hera, and then on Zeus. "And you too," he said, his voice dripping with contempt. "The queen who swore an oath of fidelity, yet whose jealousy has launched 1,000 tragedies. The king who swore to protect his family, yet has terrorized and tormented them for his own pride. Your thrones are built on a foundation of lies." The throne room was in chaos. The gods were staring at each other, the visual evidence of their betrayals now hanging in the air around them. Undeniable and damning. Alliances were shattering, and millennia of simmering resentment were boiling to the surface. "You dare," Zeus bellowed, his rage finally reaching its peak. He rose from his throne, the master bolt in his hand growing to the size of a javelin, crackling with enough power to shear the top off a mountain. "I am the king of Olympus. I am the divine order. I will strike you from existence." He hurled the bolt. It was not a projectile. It was a line of pure, white-hot annihilation that crossed the room in less than a heartbeat. Percy did not move to block it. He did not try to dodge. He simply thrust his hand forward, his palm open. The cerulean energy of his own will, his chakra, flared to life, but he didn't use it to create a shield. He used it to grasp. He reached out with his Stygian power, seized the conceptual oath of loyalty that bound the master bolt to Zeus's will, and twisted. For an infinitesimal moment, the bolt wavered in the air before him. Its connection to its master severed. Then, with a flick of his wrist, Percy redirected it. He did not hurl it back at Zeus. That would have been an act of usurpation, making him no better than Kronos. Instead, he sent it sideways, on a perfect, unswerving trajectory. The bolt of pure divine power struck the high back of Zeus's marble throne. The explosion was not loud, it was absolute. The throne, the ultimate symbol of Olympian authority, the seat of the king of the gods for 3,000 years, did not just break. It was obliterated, vaporized into a cloud of glittering dust. leaving a blackened, smoking crater in the dais where it had once stood. A stunned, horrified silence fell over the throne room. Zeus stood staring at the empty space, his face a mask of utter, cataclysmic disbelief. He was, for the first time in his immortal life, a king without a throne. "Your order is broken," Percy announced into the silence, his voice echoing with the finality of a death knell. "Your council is a sham. Your reign is over." He turned his back on them, on the shattered symbol of their power and the divine chaos he had just unleashed. "Decide amongst yourselves who will kneel, who will fight, and who will fade. My world is no longer yours to command." He walked out of the throne room, leaving the gods of Olympus staring at each other amidst the ruins of their own authority. A civil war not just declared, but already begun. Chapter 6 End. Chapter 7. The Asgardian Accord. The aftermath of Percy's gambit on Olympus was a deafening silence from the heavens. No thunderbolts fell on Aegis, no divine plagues were visited upon them. It was the silence of a royal court in the midst of a bloody, behind-the-scenes coup. Zeus's authority was shattered, his council fractured into paranoid, self-interested factions. They were too busy watching their backs to launch a unified assault. But it was a temporary peace, and both Percy and Annabeth knew it. They were in the eye of the storm. "A king with a broken throne is still a king," Annabeth said, her voice steady against the rush of the wind. "And when he finishes purging his court of anyone he suspects of disloyalty, he will turn his full, undivided attention on us. We've won time, not the war." They stood on the prow of a ship that was not a ship. It was a trireme of Athenian design, sleek and fast. But it was crewed by shades from the nameless legion, and it sailed not on water, but on the roiling, misty currents of the space between worlds. Guided by Nico's unique senses, they were navigating the conceptual ocean that separated the different mythological realities. "That's why we're here," Percy replied, his eyes fixed on the swirling, nebula-like clouds ahead. "We need allies, real ones, not just a non-aggression pact." It had been Annabeth's idea. Her strategic mind, fed with every scrap of lore she could find, had seen the pattern. Every pantheon has its own version of a great, binding fate. She had explained, pointing to a star chart in their war room that was more metaphysical than astronomical. "The Egyptians have Ma'at, a rigid cosmic order. We have the Moirai, a pre-written script. But the Norse, their stories speak of Ragnarok. It's not just a prophecy, it's a known, accepted, inevitable cycle of destruction and rebirth. They live with their doom hanging over their heads every single day. If there is anyone in any reality who would understand the desire to break free from a predetermined end, it's them." Now, as they sailed through the impossible void, a shimmering, rainbow-hued light began to cut through the gray mists ahead. It was the Bifrost. "Get ready," Nico warned from the stern, his hands plunged deep into the shadows that seemed to cling to the ship's keel. "The gatekeeper here is perceptive." The ship emerged from the mists and onto a bridge of solid, scintillating light. It stretched from the void to a massive golden gate set in a wall of clouds. Standing before the gate was a single, silent figure. He was tall and clad in gleaming golden armor, a great, curved horn slung over his shoulder. He held a massive, double-bladed sword, its point resting on the bridge before him. But it was his eyes that were the most arresting feature. They glowed with an internal, golden light, and as he looked at them, Percy felt a sensation of being utterly, completely seen. Not just his physical form, but his history, his intentions, the hollow space in his soul where his pain used to be. "You are far from your own shores, son of the sea." The Guardian's voice boomed, echoing not in the air, but directly in their minds. "I am Heimdall, guardian of Asgard. I have watched your strange island rise from the depths. I have seen the throne of the sky god broken. You bring a great storm with you. State your purpose, or be cast back into the mists." Percy stepped forward, his posture calm and open. He did not reach for Riptide. He knew this was a test that could not be won with a weapon. "Heimdall, we come in peace. We seek an audience with the All-Father, Odin. We come to offer an alliance against a common enemy." Heimdall's golden eyes narrowed. "Your enemy is the king of your own pantheon. Your war is your own. Asgard has no part in it. Our enemy is not Zeus," Percy stated, his voice ringing with the clarity of his new conviction. "Our enemy is the concept of a pre-written fate. The belief that our lives and deaths are merely a story told by others. Your Ragnarok, our prophecies, they are echoes of the same chain. I have broken my link. I believe you can break yours. The words struck a chord. Heimdall's stoic expression flickered with something unreadable. He had heard the truth in Percy's voice, the raw, unshakable power of his will. The Guardian stared at him for a long, silent moment, his gaze seeming to pierce the veil of reality itself. Finally, he nodded, a slow, deliberate movement. Your will is strong, Heimdall declared. And your cause is intriguing. Very well. The All-Father will see you. He stepped aside, plunging his greatsword into a receptacle on the bridge. With a grinding, cosmic roar, the golden gates of Asgard swung open. The sight beyond was breathtaking. A city of gold and silver towers perched atop a mountain floating in a sea of stars. Waterfalls cascaded from its edges into the cosmos below, and the air hummed with a powerful, ancient energy. This was a realm of warriors and gods, and it radiated a raw, untamed vitality that made Olympus feel like a sterile museum. They were led through the city by a pair of Valkyries, their winged helmets and gleaming spears drawing stares from the Aesir who thronged the streets. These were not the lithe, graceful nature spirits of the Greek world. The Norse gods were broad-shouldered, loud, and alive, their faces etched with the joy of battle and the sorrow of 1,000 years of looming doom. They entered the great golden hall of Sesrumnir, where Odin sat upon his high throne, Listjelf. The All-Father was not what Percy had expected. He was not a mighty, muscle-bound king like Zeus. He was old, his face a roadmap of ancient wisdom and deep-set weariness. A wide-brimmed hat was pulled low, shadowing his face, but a single, piercing blue eye blazed out from the darkness, seeming to see everything. At his feet sat 2 massive wolves, and on his shoulders perched 2 black ravens, who watched the newcomers with intelligent, obsidian eyes. So, Odin's voice was a dry, rasping whisper, yet it filled the vast hall. The little storm from the south has reached our shores. The boy who would be king. You have a great deal of nerve, son of Poseidon, coming to my court after shattering the oldest throne in your own. I have no desire for a throne, Percy said, stepping forward into the center of the hall. Annabeth was at his side, her expression calm and analytical, taking in every detail of the hall, the guards, the king. I came to offer you a chance at a future your people have never been allowed to have. A future without a final battle. A future without a preordained end. A low murmur of disbelief and derision rippled through the assembled Aesir. A massive, red-bearded god with a booming laugh and a huge hammer resting on his shoulder stepped forward. No end, he roared, his voice like a thunderclap. Our end is our glory. To face the Fenris wolf and the world serpent at the final battle is the destiny of every warrior in this hall. What are you offering? A quiet life. A coward's peace. I am offering you a choice, Thor, Percy said, meeting the thunder god's gaze without flinching. The choice to live for something more than a glorious death. Odin raised a hand, and the hall fell silent. His single eye was fixed on Percy, burning with a cold, analytical fire. Words are cheap, boy. You speak of breaking chains, but you are still immortal. Your power is new, untested. Your rebellion could be a flash in the pan, and any who ally with you would be dragged down into your ruin. Asgard will not wager its existence on a pretty speech. You must prove your worth. He stroked his long, gray beard. I propose a series of tests. Not of simple strength, but of the qualities a true leader must possess. Intellect, prowess, and vision. Pass them, and I will hear your proposal. Fail, and you will be sent home to fight your war alone. Percy nodded. I accept. Odin's eye shifted, landing on Annabeth. The foundation of any great endeavor is strategy, he rasped. You, girl, the daughter of the owl goddess. You have the look of a weaver of plans. Let us see if your mind is as sharp as your eyes. He gestured to a low table where a game board was set. It was Nephitophel, the ancient game of Viking kings. Play me, show me the quality of your thoughts. Annabeth did not hesitate. She walked to the table and sat opposite the ancient god, a lone demigod Chalangi. The wisest being in the 9 realms to a battle of pure intellect. The game began. Odin's moves were cunning, born of millennia of experience. He built traps within traps, his strategies layered and complex. But Annabeth did not play a defensive game. She was aggressive, adaptive, her mind a razor-sharp instrument that cut through his intricate plans. She sacrificed pieces to gain a strategic advantage. Her thinking fluid and unpredictable. The assembled Aesir watched in stunned silence as the mortal girl not only held her own but forced the All-Father to pause, to reconsider, to think. She did not win, but she did not lose. After an hour of intense, silent battle, they reached a perfect stalemate. Annabeth had maneuvered her king into a position where it could not be captured, but she could not break Odin's siege to win. It was a draw. Odin leaned back, his one eye gleaming with a grudging respect. "You think not like a shield, but like a spear," he said. "Your mind is a worthy weapon." Annabeth inclined her head, a small, triumphant smile on her lips. A good architect knows that the best defense is a flawless design. Next, Thor stepped forward, a wide, challenging grin on his face. He hefted his hammer, Mjolnir, which crackled with latent lightning. "A sharp mind is fine," he boomed, "but a war is not won on a game board. Boy, you may have the will of a king, but do you have the arm of a warrior? Let's see this new power of yours. Spar with me." They moved to the palace's training grounds, a vast, open courtyard. The Aesir formed a ring, eager for the spectacle. Thor tossed his hammer aside. "I will not need it for this," he declared with a laugh. The moment the match began, Thor charged, a veritable mountain of muscle and divine fury. He expected to smash through Percy's defense in seconds. He was wrong. Percy didn't meet his charge head-on. He flowed. Using his chakra to enhance his speed to impossible levels, he sidestepped the Thunder God's bull rush. His hand tapping Thor's shoulder as he passed. The touch sent a jolt of pure kinetic energy through Thor's body, making him stumble. The battle was a dance of contrasts. Thor was a landslide, all brute force and overwhelming power. Percy was the river that flows around the stone. He didn't try to block Thor's thunderous punches, he redirected them. He used the moisture in the air to create slick patches of ice under Thor's feet. To form sharp, stinging whips of vapor that distracted and annoyed him. His movements were a seamless blend of swordplay, riptide bronze blur, and precise, chakra. Fueled strikes that landed on nerve clusters and joints, never causing serious injury but always disrupting Thor's balance and momentum. Thor grew increasingly frustrated. He was the strongest warrior in the 9 realms. Yet he could not land a single solid blow on this slippery, infuriating demigod. He let out a roar of rage and summoned his hammer back to his hand, the sky darkening overhead. "Enough games," he bellowed. "I agree," Percy said, and as Thor swung Mjolnir in a devastating, lightning-wreathed arc, Percy did something no one expected. He dropped Riptide. He lunged inside the hammer's swing and slammed his open palm against Thor's chest. It was not a physical blow. It was the same technique he had used on Clarice, a focused, absolute projection of his will. Thor's swing halted mid-air as if he had hit an invisible, immovable wall. The lightning fizzled. The god's eyes went wide with shock, his unstoppable momentum utterly and completely cancelled. In that moment of stunned paralysis, Percy swept Thor's feet out from under him. The god of thunder crashed to the ground with a resounding boom. Percy stood over him, not with a sword, but with his hand outstretched. "Yield," he asked calmly. Thor stared up at him, panting, a look of dawning, incredulous respect on his face. He began to laugh, a deep, booming sound of genuine amusement. "By my father's beard," he roared, taking Percy's hand and letting himself be pulled up. "You are no coward. You fight with the cunning of Loki and the kick of a mule." "I yield." Percy had passed the second test. He returned to the throne room, flanked by a now enthusiastic Thor, to face Odin once more. "You have a strategist's mind and a warrior's arm," Odin rasped, his expression unreadable. "But the final, and most important quality, is vision. You claim you can free us from our destiny. Ragnarok is not a mere prophecy, boy. It is the great, grinding engine of our reality. It has happened before, and it will happen again. It is the promise of renewal that gives our struggle meaning. Show me how you can unwrite the final page of our book." This was the final test. Percy stepped forward and closed his eyes. He reached out with the senses the sticks had given him. He felt the threads of fate that bound Asgard, the thick, heavy cords of destiny that led every god in the hall towards their preordained death. But as he looked deeper, he saw what he had suspected. Woven into the coarse, powerful strands of the Norse fate were other threads. They were thinner, more subtle, almost invisible, but they hummed with a different energy. An energy he recognized, the manipulative, deterministic power of the Greek fates. He opened his eyes and looked at Odin. "Your cycle is not your own," he said, his voice resonating with his Stygian power. He raised his hands, and the air around them shimmered. He did not create an illusion. He pulled back a curtain, allowing them all to see the conceptual truth. The gods of Asgard gasped. Hanging in the air before them was a shimmering, spectral tapestry, the story of Ragnarok. They saw Thor fighting the world serpent, Odin being devoured by the Fenris wolf, Heimdall and Loki killing each other. They had all seen these images in their dreams and visions since they were born. But now, for the first time, they saw the tiny, shimmering threads of outside influence, twisting their story, guiding it. Ensuring that every time it ended in the same way. A way that kept them contained, locked in their own cosmic drama, never evolving into a power that could challenge the Olympian order. "They haven't just been watching you," Percy explained, his voice grim. "They've been pruning your timeline. For thousands of years, the Moirai have subtly influenced your destiny to ensure your cycle remains predictable, stable, and, most importantly, no threat to them. Your glorious end is nothing but a cage to keep you in your place." He let the vision fade. The hall was utterly silent. He had not just offered them an alliance. He had revealed that their most sacred truth was a lie. He had given them an enemy they had never known they had. Odin sat on his throne for a long time, his one eye staring into a distance only he could see. The implications of what Percy had shown him were universe-shattering. Finally, he rose from his throne. "For eons, we have fought to win a glorious end," the All-Father declared, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "Today, we have been offered something more. A chance to fight for a new beginning." He slammed the butt of his spear, Gingnir, on the floor of the hall. The sound was like the crack of creation. "The Asgardian accord is forged. We will join your coalition, son of the sea. Your war against the masters of fate is now our war. To the 9 realms with prophecy. We will write our own story." A deafening roar of approval went up from the Aesir. The age of Ragnarok was over. A new, uncertain, but gloriously free age had begun. Percy had his first true allies. Deep in a shadowed alcove of the palace, unseen and unheard, a slender figure watched the celebration with a detached, serpentine smile. Loki, the god of mischief and lies, had seen the whole display. As the hall cheered for a new war, a new purpose, a different voice whispered in the back of his mind. It was not his own. It was ancient, cold, and promised a far more amusing outcome than a simple change of management. "A broken chain is a lovely start," the voice of Erebus whispered, a serpent of thought coiling in Loki's mind. "But I imagine the glorious chaos when the very idea of chains is forgotten. Why help them build a new world, when you could preside over the exquisite, silent beauty of the end of all worlds?" Loki's smile widened. This new war was going to be far more interesting than anyone could possibly imagine. Chapter 7 End. Chapter 8. The Shadow War. The victory in Asgard brought more than just an army of allies, it brought a sense of legitimacy. For the first time, Aegis felt less like a rebellious outpost and more like the capital of a burgeoning coalition. The arrival of a contingent of Aesir warriors, led by the boisterous Thor himself, injected a new, vibrant energy into the community. They shared stories, sparred in the arenas, and drank to their shared cause of spitting in Destiny's Eye. The forge rang with the sounds of Asgardian steel being hammered alongside celestial bronze. Morale was at an all-time high, which is why the first signs of the sickness were so easy to dismiss. It began as a subtle fraying at the edges of their unity. A son of Ares, a grizzled veteran of the Titan War, got into a shouting match with a newly arrived Norse berserker over a perceived insult during a training drill. Annabeth had to physically separate them, something that hadn't been necessary since the earliest days. A few days later, a batch of potions brewed by a daughter of Hecate turned foul, causing minor hallucinations in those who drank them. She swore her ingredients were pure, her incantations perfect. She tearfully accused someone of sabotage. Annabeth logged the incidents, her brow furrowed. She initially attributed it to stress, to the culture clash between the Greeks, Romans, and Norse. But the pattern grew, the frequency of disputes increasing. The easy camaraderie of the dining hall was replaced by a tense, watchful silence. People started eating in smaller, more insular groups. Whispers started. The former hunter of Artemis was seen talking to a Roman legionary. What were they plotting? Why was Nico spending so much time with the shades of the nameless legion? Were they truly loyal, or just waiting for a moment of weakness? The nightmares started next. They were not the usual demigod dreams of prophecies and monsters. These were more personal, more insidious. Annabeth herself dreamed that her blueprints for the final phase of the Citadel had a fatal, catastrophic flaw she couldn't find. And that the entire structure was destined to collapse and kill everyone she had sworn to protect. She woke up in a cold sweat, her own mind turned against her. She found Percy staring out at the pre-dawn sea, his posture rigid. Bad dream, she asked softly, wrapping her arms around him from behind. He didn't relax. I was on a throne, made of black ice, and the whole universe was dark. All the stars were out, and it was quiet. He shuddered. The worst part is, for a second, it felt like peace. That was the final piece of the puzzle for Annabeth. This wasn't stress. This was an attack, a coordinated, silent, and terrifyingly effective assault on their most crucial asset, their will. She went to work. With the cold, detached precision of a general diagnosing a plague, she began her investigation. She didn't ask people about their feelings, she collected data. She mapped the arguments, the accusations, the nightmares. The results were chilling. Across demographics, Greek, Norse, demigod, shade, the underlying emotional vector was the same. A creeping, cold despair. A sense of utter futility. A whisper in the back of the mind that said, it's pointless. You will fail. Your friends will betray you. The darkness is coming for everyone. She took her findings to the one person she knew who was fluent in the language of despair, Nico D'Angelo. She found him in the catacombs they had carved out beneath the Citadel, a silent, cool space where he felt most at home. He listened to her findings without interruption, his dark eyes growing distant. When she finished, he was silent for a long time. It's a psychic contagion, he finally said, his voice a low whisper. But it's not from a god. Not hypnos, not phobter. I've felt their touch. This is empty. It's the emotional equivalent of absolute zero. He walked to a dark, unadorned wall and placed his palm against it. The stone seemed to ripple, showing a brief, fleeting image of a starless void. When Percy and I were in the underworld, after he defeated Protesilaus, there was a residue left behind. A piece of living darkness. It whispered. I can feel that same whisper now, clinging to this island like a fungus. It's not just attacking us. It's feeding. Annabeth's blood ran cold. Erebus. Nico nodded, his face grim. This isn't a siege of arrows and swords. It's a war of the mind. He's turning our own doubts into weapons and slitting our throats with them while we sleep. Percy was not immune. The void the sticks had carved inside him was a perfect vessel for the whispers of the primordial darkness. He didn't dream of past failures. Erebus knew those anchors were gone. Instead, the entity attacked his future, showing him the logical, terrifying extension of his own path. He saw himself standing before the defeated gods of Asgard, Thor kneeling before him, his eyes full of fear, not respect. Every alliance ends in conquest, the whisper echoed in his mind. He saw himself debating Annabeth in their war room. But her face was pale, her arguments not strategic, but desperate pleas for him to stop. He saw himself ignoring her, his own certainty having calcified into tyranny. Every leader eventually believes he is the only one who knows the way. And he saw the vision of the silent, dark universe again and again. He was on his throne of black ice, the master of a perfectly ordered, perfectly controlled, and perfectly dead cosmos. I am not your enemy, the silent whisper of Erebus seemed to say. I am the inevitable conclusion of your ambition. I am your destiny. His iron will, forged in defiance and sacrifice, began to show hairline fractures. He grew distant, quiet. The easy confidence that had inspired so many was replaced by a brooding, intense watchfulness. He looked at his allies and saw potential traitors. He looked at his own power and saw the seeds of a monster. While Percy wrestled with the abyss in his own soul, Annabeth took command of the war for the soul of Aegis. She knew she couldn't fight a primordial being of pure darkness. But she could fight the shadows it cast. She could build a bonfire so bright it left no place for them to hide. She called a general assembly in the main square. Her voice, amplified by a small, Hephaestus-forged device, rang out with a clarity and confidence that was a direct rebuke to the creeping despair. "Look around you," she commanded, her gray eyes sweeping over the tense, suspicious faces. "We are under attack, not by an army, but by a whisper. It's a poison of doubt, designed to make us turn on each other. It wants us to hide. It wants us to suspect. It wants us to believe we are alone." She pointed to the half-finished citadel behind her. "We will do the opposite. From this moment on, no one eats alone. We will take our meals together. Training drills will be conducted in mixed squads, Norse with Greeks, Romans with hunters. We will finish this citadel not as individual work crews, but as one single body. Every hand that is not holding a weapon will be laying a stone." She laid out her strategy, a brilliant campaign of psychological defense. She instituted mandatory sparring sessions, not for victory, but to rebuild trust through shared exertion. She created a council of grievances, where any dispute could be aired publicly, mediated by a son of Apollo who could sense blatant lies, starving the whispers of the secrecy they needed to thrive. Her orders were simple, practical, and potent. Her message was clear. Community was the antidote to despair. "The enemy is a shadow," she finished, her voice ringing with the passion of a queen defending her people. "So we will live entirely in the light. We will trust each other, not because it is easy, but because it is our greatest weapon. We will work, we will build, and we will endure, together." It was a turning point. They had a tangible enemy now, and they had a tangible defense. A new energy surged through the island, the grim, determined energy of a people united against a common, unseen foe. They followed her orders to the letter, their actions a communal act of defiance. Percy watched it all, a part of him filled with pride for Annabeth. Another part trapped in the cold, isolating prison of his own mind. He knew Annabeth was saving his people, but he also knew that her bonfire could only hold the darkness at bay. To end the threat, he had to extinguish the source. And the source was inside his own head. He found Annabeth directing a crew of Cyclops, her face smudged with dust but her eyes bright with purpose. He pulled her aside. "You're saving them," he said, his voice low. "But it's not enough. The whispers are getting stronger. It's feeding on my doubts. I'm the epicenter. I have to face it." Fear flashed in her eyes. "How?" "I'm going to the core of the island," he said. "To the spring. I'm going to meditate, and invite it in. I have to confront it on its own terms." "Percy." "No, that's what it wants. It will consume you. It's already trying to," he replied, his expression grim. "The only way to win this war is to fight it on my own ground. Hold the line, Annabeth. Just hold the line." He left her there and descended into the heart of the island. He sat by the edge of the clear, pure spring he had created, the water a perfect mirror. He closed his eyes and shut out the sounds of construction, the shouts of his people, the roar of the sea. He focused inward, opening the gates of his mind, and deliberately stepped into the void that Erebus had cultivated within him. The world vanished. He was floating in an infinite, silent, starless expanse. It was the vision from his nightmare. Absolute nothingness. Before him, his own reflection coalesced from the darkness, but its eyes were empty pits. And its smile was a sliver of cold amusement. "You came," the reflection said, its voice Percy's own, but devoid of all warmth. "I knew you would. You were a creature of action. You could not simply stand by." "Get out of my head," Percy commanded. "Get away from my people. These people are your greatest weakness," the reflection countered, circling him slowly. "You carry the weight of their futures. A weight that will crush you. Look." The void shimmered, and he saw it, Annabeth, her hair gray, her face lined with sorrow, turning her back on him. "You've gone too far, Percy," she wept. "I don't know you anymore." The vision was so real, so plausible, it was a physical blow. "You are becoming a monster to fight monsters," the voice continued, its logic a cold, sharp knife. "You wield the power to unmake reality. How long before you decide that a dissenting opinion needs to be unmade? That an inconvenient ally needs to be erased. Zeus was a tyrant born of pride. You will be a tyrant born of good intentions. And you will be far, far worse. It showed him the silent universe again, the throne of black ice. This is not failure, Perseus. This is ultimate success, perfect order, perfect peace. No more war, no more pain, no more messy, unpredictable choices. The endpoint of all ambition. Why fight it? Why not embrace it? I am not your enemy. I am your final, perfect form. The pull of its logic was immense. The fear of what he might become was the truest fear he had ever known. Despair, cold and absolute, washed over him. The reflection was right. His path was a razor's edge, and the fall was into an abyss of his own making. He felt his will begin to dissolve, to surrender to the beautiful, simple peace of giving up. And then, he heard something. Faintly, from the world outside his mind. It was the rhythmic thump-thump-thump of Cyclops' hammers striking stone. It was the sound of something being built. He thought of Annabeth, not her tear-streaked face in the vision, but her real face. Smudged with dirt, her eyes blazing with defiance as she organized their defense. She wasn't fighting for some perfect, final peace. She was fighting for the messy, difficult, beautiful process of building something together. A new strength, not from the sticks, not from the sea, but from the very core of his being, rose up in him. He looked at his dark reflection, at the embodiment of the void. And he finally understood the flaw in its perfect logic. You're wrong, Percy said, his voice quiet but unshakable. You think the endgame is all that matters. A final, perfect state of silent order. He shook his head. That's not peace. That's just the end. The meaning isn't in the destination. It's in the journey, the struggle, the building. He met the reflection's empty gaze, and his own eyes blazed with sea-green light. I would rather build 1,000 civilizations that are flawed and temporary and destined to fall, than rule for a single second over your perfect, silent empire of nothing. Quote, it was a declaration of faith. Faith in choice, faith in struggle, faith in life itself. It was a concept so fundamentally opposed to the nature of Erebus that the void could not contain it. A crack appeared in the darkness. The reflection screamed, a sound of pure negation, as Percy's will, his affirmation of life, spread through the metaphysical realm like a shockwave of light. The infinite void shattered like black glass, dissolving into nothing. Percy gasped, his eyes flying open. He was back by the spring, his body drenched in sweat, his heart hammering. But his mind was clear. The whispers were gone. A profound, unburdened silence filled his soul. He rose and walked out into the sunlight. The change was palpable. A collective sigh of relief seemed to pass over the island as the psychic pressure vanished. People stopped their work, looking at each other, the clouds of paranoia and despair gone from their eyes, replaced by a dawning, exhausted relief. Annabeth ran to him, her face full of frantic worry. Percy. He caught her, holding her tight. It's over, he said. For now, he had won. He had faced the primordial darkness not with power, but with philosophy. He had defined himself against the void. But as he looked out at his people, who were now slowly, tentatively beginning to cheer, he knew this was just one battle in a war that would be fought not for thrones or territory, but for the very meaning of existence. And Erebus, he knew, was patient. Chapter 8 End. Chapter 9. The Siege of Two Worlds. The peace was a fragile, beautiful thing. And it lasted for precisely 1 week. It was a week of determined rebuilding, not just of the citadel, but of the community's spirit. The victory against Erebus's shadow plague had forged them into something stronger, a people defined not just by their defiance, but by their resilience. Laughter returned to the dining hall. The clash of steel in the arena was once again the sound of training, not of suspicion. Then, the world broke. It began with a flicker. On every screen on Aegis, Annabeth's tactical displays, the Hephaestus forged communication mirrors, even the face of the scrying bowls, images began to appear. Jumbled, chaotic feeds from the mortal world. A news helicopter in St. Louis showed a 7-headed hydra, its necks regenerating as fast as the police could open fire. Rampaging through a traffic jam on the Gateway Arch Bridge. A tourist's shaky smartphone footage from Times Square showed a leathery winged fury, its eyes glowing with malevolent fire, swooping down to snatch a hot dog vendor's cart. In London, a pack of hellhounds chased terrified commuters into the tube. The mist was gone, not fading, not thinning. It had been torn to shreds, ripped away from the world with the force of a tectonic plate shift. For the first time in millennia, the mortal and mythological worlds were staring at each other in raw, unfiltered disbelief and terror. "It's them," Annabeth said, her voice a low, horrified whisper as she stared at the chaotic displays in the war room. "The Fates. This is their endgame." Percy stood beside her, his face a grim mask. He could feel it through his Stygian senses, a wrenching, tearing sensation in the fabric of reality. It was a desperate, scorched earth tactic. "They can't control me," he said, his voice cold as the abyss. "So they're going to burn the world down and tell everyone I'm the one holding the match." As if on cue, the sky above Aegis turned a violent, bruised purple. The air grew thick with the scent of ozone and divine rage. A storm was gathering, but it was no natural tempest. It was a manifestation of pure, focused power. At the heart of the storm, a golden palace shimmered into existence. An ethereal projection of the court on Olympus. From this projection, a fleet descended. Not of ships, but of golden war chariots pulled by Pegasi and griffins. Legions of minor gods, their bronze armor gleaming. Swarms of wind spirits and storm nymphs. And at their head, riding a chariot of pure, crackling lightning, was Zeus. He no longer looked like a disgruntled king. His face was a mask of absolute, divine fury. His eyes burning with the white-hot light of a dying star. His authority had been challenged, his throne destroyed. This was not a political move. This was annihilation. Simultaneously, the seas around Aegis began to churn. From the depths rose an army of a different sort. Telkines with their dog-like faces and flippered hands, sea serpents of colossal size, and legions of warrior merfolk whose loyalty still lay with the old regime. It was a pincer movement of sky and sea. Olympus was throwing everything it had left at them. The horns of Aegis sounded, a deep, resonant cry that echoed across the island. The defenders rushed to their posts. The Norse berserkers, led by a roaring, laughing Thor, took their positions on the northern battlements, eager for a glorious fight. The disciplined Roman phalanx, bolstered by the fighters of Camp Half-Blood, formed a shield wall protecting the main gate. The hunters, their silver bows drawn, lined the citadel's highest towers. The nameless legion materialized on the cliffs, a silent, gray wall of spectral energy against the tide of monsters. Annabeth stood at the central command table, her face illuminated by the flickering lights of the battlefield displays. She was no longer just Percy's strategist. She was the commander of a multinational, multi-mythological army, and she moved with the calm, terrifying efficiency of a Valkyrie choosing the slain. "Thor," she commanded, her voice cutting through the war room's chaos. "The sky is yours. Do not let them get a foothold. Use the storm. Turn their own lightning against them. Hephaestus's children, reinforce the sea walls. Roman contingent, hold the gate at all costs. Hunters, target their commanders. Cut off the head." Her orders were clean, precise, and brilliant. She was the architect of their defense, and this battle was her symphony. Percy stood beside her, but his eyes were not on the approaching armies. They were fixed on the swirling vortex of purple storm clouds. On the ethereal projection of Olympus. He knew this was a feint. A massive, world-ending feint, but a feint nonetheless. The soldiers, the monsters, they were just the visible part of the attack. The true enemy, the true target, was not on the battlefield. "I have to go," he said, his voice quiet amidst the din. Annabeth didn't look away from her map. "I know. You can hold them," he stated. It wasn't a question. "Yes," she replied, her focus absolute. She finally turned her head, her gray eyes meeting his. The fear was there, but it was banked, controlled, overs. Hallowed by a trust so profound it was a physical force. "Just be careful. Your war is with an idea. Mine is with an army. Mine is simpler." He nodded. Nico D'Angelo detached himself from the shadows in the corner of the room. "I'm ready. Get me to their front door," Percy commanded. Nico nodded, placed a hand on Percy's shoulder, and the two of them dissolved into a patch of inky blackness, vanishing from the war room just as the first Olympian thunderbolt struck the outer defenses of Aegis with the force of a tactical nuke. The journey was a sickening, wrenching passage through a space that was not a space. When they emerged, they were standing on a platform of gray, unadorned marble, floating in a sea of pure chaos. Above and below them, swirling like cosmic dust motes, were infinite, shimmering threads of light. They were inside the loom. This was the Fates' fortress, the conceptual heart of their power. The temple itself stood before them, its doors sealed. But Percy felt no lock, no magical barrier. The only thing holding the doors shut was the weight of destiny itself. He placed his palms flat against them. He did not push. He did not channel a blast of energy. He simply exerted his will. His authority as the master of the Styx, the one being who could operate outside their script. The doors groaned, the sound of a story resisting its own editing, and swung inward. The chamber beyond was vast. The air hummed with power. At the center of it all was the loom of fate, a colossal, glowing construct of silver and gold, threads of possibility being woven into the fabric of reality at an impossible speed. And standing before it, their backs to the entrance, were the three Fates, Clotho, Lachesis, and Atropos, not as old crones, but as terrifying, majestic figures of cosmic law. "You are a fool to have come, Perseus Jackson," their voices echoed as one, a chorus of absolute certainty. "Your story was written to end here. We have simply chosen the final punctuation." "My story is my own to write," Percy said, riptide appearing in his hand. "Is it?" The Fates chorused. "Every hero has a flaw. Every story has a tragedy. And every great man has a ghost. We have simply given yours a body." Quote. From the shadows beside the loom, a figure stepped forward. He wore battered bronze armor, the emblem of the Hermes cabin barely visible. His face was scarred, his sandy hair matted with sweat, and in his hand, he held a wicked, dual-edged sword of celestial steel and tempered mortal gold. Backbiter. Percy's breath caught in his throat. His blood ran cold. It couldn't be. "Luke," he whispered, the name and agony on his lips. Luke Castellan's eyes, the same blue eyes that had once looked at him with brotherly affection, were now cold, empty pits of controlled rage. He moved with his old, familiar, deadly grace, but it was stiff, jerky. The movements of a marionette. "He cannot hear you," the Fates taunted, their voices dripping with cruel satisfaction. "His soul is our plaything. Bound by our thread, we are using the very material of your greatest failure to unmake you." "Poetic, is it not?" Luke charged. The duel was a nightmare. Percy was instantly on the defensive, his mind reeling. This was not a shade. This was a body, resurrected and reanimated, powered by a captive soul and the Fates' own divine energy. Luke fought with all the skill of the greatest swordsman of his generation, every parry, every thrust a blur of deadly precision. Percy was forced back, the clash of riptide against backbiter echoing through the vast chamber. He couldn't bring himself to counterattack. This was Luke, his friend, the broken hero he had failed to save. To fight him felt like a desecration. "Fight him, boy," the Fates screamed, their voices a whip against his mind. "Strike him down. Fulfill your destiny, to be the one who kills your brother twice." They fought across the chamber, their blades a whirlwind of bronze and gold. Luke was relentless, a perfect, soulless weapon. Percy's powers reacted instinctively, erecting shields of force, using blasts of water from the ambient moisture to slow Luke's advance, but it was a desperate, losing battle. His heart wasn't in it. His guilt was a physical weight, heavier than any shield. He saw an opening, a chance to disarm Luke, but he hesitated. And in that moment of hesitation, Luke's sword slashed across his arm, drawing blood. The pain was sharp, but the psychic blow was worse. The Fates laughed, their triumph a chilling symphony. Percy stumbled back, clutching his arm, his mind a maelstrom of grief and despair. He was going to lose. He was going to die here, at the hands of his friend, and his dream, his new world, would die with him. "Fight to win." Annabeth's voice cut through his despair, a memory as sharp and clear as a clarion call. He looked up at Luke's empty eyes and saw not his friend, but a slave. And the rage that had been buried under his guilt finally erupted. Not at Luke, but at the crones who had desecrated his memory, who had turned his friend into a puppet. He would not kill Luke, but he would free him. He changed his stance. He stopped trying to defend. He began to fight with a new purpose. He parried Luke's next blow and, instead of retreating, he pushed forward, his sea-green eyes blazing with the light of the sticks. "Luke," he roared, his verses OICE imbued with the conceptual power of his domain. "I'm not your enemy. They are." He gestured with his sword towards the Fates. Luke faltered for a fraction of a second, his head twitching, before the Fates' control reasserted itself. "He is bound," they shrieked. "Your words are meaningless." "No," Percy shot back, his voice resonating with absolute conviction. "Some bonds are stronger than fate. Some promises can't be unwritten." Quote. He dodged another vicious swing from Backbiter and focused his will, his Stygian power. He didn't try to sever the threads controlling Luke. He reached for a different thread. A thread Luke himself had woven, a thread of pure, undiluted mortal will. "An oath. You made a promise, Luke," Percy shouted, his voice a physical force that made the very threads of destiny vibrate around them. He parried another blow, their faces inches apart. "Your last words. To Annabeth. You promised her you would be reborn. You promised you would do it right. A hero's final oath is bound to the sticks. And I am its master." He slammed his free hand onto the hilt of Luke's sword, his touch sending a shockwave of pure, conceptual power up Luke's arm. It was not an attack. It was a reminder, a key, turning a lock deep within Luke's captive soul. Luke screamed, a raw, human sound of pure agony as two absolute, cosmic forces warred for his soul. His body convulsed. He dropped to one knee, clutching his head. "No," the Fates shrieked in unison, seeing their control slipping. "Obey." For one breathtaking moment, Luke Castellan's eyes cleared. The cold, empty rage was gone, replaced by a flicker of the old, weary, tragic intelligence. He saw Percy. He saw the Fates. He saw the shimmering, hateful threads attached to his own limbs. He understood, and he chose. With a final, guttural roar that was part defiance, part despair, and part triumph, he rose. He knew his soul was forfeit, his body a borrowed shell. But in this final, lucid moment, his will was his own. He would not be a puppet. He would be a hero. He did not turn his sword on Percy. He did not charge the Fates. With the last of his strength, he spun around and hurled Backbiter, not like a sword, but like a javelin. With all the force of his demigod strength and all the rage of his tormented soul. The target was not the Fates themselves. It was the loom, the sword, a blade forged of two worlds. A weapon that had tasted the blood of both gods and mortals, flew true. It struck the central axle of the loom of fate with a sound that was not a sound, a metaphysical crack that echoed backwards and forwards through time. The loom of fate shattered. It did not explode in a shower of sparks. It imploded in a cataclysm of pure, raw causality. The infinite threads of destiny snapped, recoiling like whips of light. A wave of chronological energy erupted outwards. Luke's body was the first to be consumed, dissolving into motes of golden light, his final, defiant expression one of peace. His soul, finally free, was gone. The three Fates shrieked, a sound of cosmic, soul-tearing agony as their instrument, their power, their very reason for being, was unmade. They were not killed, but their connection to the timeline, their ability to weave and dictate the future, was severed. They were blinded, cast adrift in the chaos they had sought to control. Percy threw up a shield of pure will, the chronal wave washing over him, showing him a billion possible futures and a trillion dead pasts in a single, agonizing instant. When it subsided, he was alone. He stood in a ruined chamber, amidst the faint, fading glitter of what had once been the threads of destiny. Luke was gone. The Fates were silenced. He had done it. He had not just cut the strings. He had smashed the entire puppet theater to dust. The age of prophecy was over. He turned, the silence of the chamber a stark contrast to the war he knew was still raging for the soul of his world. He had won his battle. Now he had to go back and help Annabeth win hers. Chapter 9 End. Chapter 10. The Unwritten Page. The silence in the Fates' ruined sanctum was the silence of a broken clock. Time, once a river directed by their loom, was now a chaotic, directionless ocean. Percy stood in the epicenter of the paradox, the chronal energy of the shattered artifact washing over him, not with force, but with a dizzying sense of potential. He could feel it in his bones. The future was no longer a destination. It was a blank, unwritten page. He had no time to mourn Luke. Grief was a luxury for a war that was over, and his was still raging. He reached for the shadows, calling for Nico, but his Stygian senses found nothing to grasp. The pathways between worlds, once governed by ancient laws, were now flickering, unstable. He was cut off. He closed his eyes, ignoring the phantom pathways. He didn't need a door. He was a force of nature. He focused on a single, unwavering point of light in the chaos of reality, Annabeth. He thought of her voice, her scent, the fierce intelligence in her gray eyes. She was his anchor, his true north. He wrapped his will around that connection and pulled. Reality bent around him. He ruined temple dissolved into a nauseating smear of color and light. He was not traveling through a place, but through a state of being, forcing a path through the raw, untamed chaos of a universe without destiny. For a heart-stopping moment, he was everywhere and nowhere. Then, with the jarring finality of a lightning strike, his feet hit solid ground. He was standing in the main courtyard of Aegis. The air thick with the smell of ozone, burning stone, and blood. The battle was a maelstrom of desperate, close-quarters combat. Annabeth's brilliant strategy had held, but the sheer, overwhelming numbers of Olympus were taking their toll. The shield wall at the main gate was buckling. Thor was a whirlwind of lightning and thunder in the sky, but he was facing a dozen minor gods of storm and wind, a god against a committee. The defenders were bleeding, dying, but they were not breaking. They were fighting with the desperate courage of people defending their only home. And then, everything changed. It wasn't a sound or a flash of light. It was a feeling, a deep, psychic tremor that every god, demigod, and mythological creature felt in the core of their being. It was the feeling of a net, which they had not even known they were in, suddenly vanishing. The feeling of a script, which they had unknowingly been following their entire lives, being abruptly set on fire. For the defenders of Aegis, it was a sudden, exhilarating rush of pure, untethered freedom. A wave of hope. For the armies of Olympus, it was catastrophic. They had always fought with the absolute, unshakable certainty of divine right. Of a future that was preordained to be theirs. That certainty was their greatest weapon, the foundation of their morale. Now, it was gone. A minor god of victory, leading a charge against the Roman phalanx, suddenly faltered. His sword felt heavy in his hand. He looked at the grim, determined faces of the demigods before him and, for the first time in his immortal life, felt a cold, terrifying sliver of doubt. What if he wasn't destined to win? A storm nymph, locked in an aerial duel with a Valkyrie, hesitated. Her control over the winds wavered. The future, once a clear, shining path, was now a fog. She was no longer an agent of destiny. She was just a combatant in a war she could lose. Across the entire battlefield, the Olympian forces were struck by a collective, paralyzing crisis of faith. Their attacks became hesitant, their defenses sloppy. The divine machine of war, built on the chassis of inevitability, was grinding to a halt. Into this sudden, shocked lull, Percy Jackson walked forward. He was not glowing with power. He was not shouting a challenge. He was just a single, determined figure, his clothes torn, his arm bleeding, riptide held loosely in his hand. But as he moved through the ranks of his weary defenders, they parted before him like the sea, a wave of renewed hope and determination following in his wake. He walked past the buckled shield wall, past the bodies of the fallen, and onto the causeway, until he stood alone, facing the might of the Olympian army. Zeus saw him from his war chariot in the sky. The doubt that plagued his soldiers had not touched him. It had been replaced by a pure, incandescent rage. He saw not a boy, but the living embodiment of his own humiliation. You. Zeus's voice was the roar of a collapsing universe. He pointed the stump of his shattered master bolt, which now crackled erratically like a broken power line. This ends now. He descended from the sky like a meteor, his chariot crashing to the ground. He strode towards Percy, growing in size until he was a 20-foot-tall titan of muscle and fury, his form crackling with untamed electrical energy. You have broken my world, boy. I will grind you, your fortress, and your pathetic dream into dust. He swung a fist that could shatter a mountain. Percy didn't meet it with a shield of water or a blast of force. He flowed around it, the motion as natural as a tide. He moved inside the god's guard, his smaller size an advantage, and delivered a single, chakra-infused strike to the side of Zeus's knee. The god roared in pain and surprise as his joint buckled, the blow hitting with the force of a battering ram. The battle that followed was not one of power against power. It was an ideological war made flesh. Zeus was raw, divine force, the embodiment of absolute, tyrannical authority. He threw thunderbolts, summoned hurricanes, his rage shaking the very foundations of the island. Percy was a revolution in motion. He was the concept of freedom made into a warrior. He did not block. He did not try to overpower. He used his Stygian senses to see the lines of Zeus's power, the way the god was connected to the sky and the storm, and he subtly, precisely, unwove them. He didn't stop the lightning. He redirected its path with a gesture, sending it harmlessly into the sea. He didn't fight the hurricane. He found its eye and stood within it, untouched. He was dismantling the very idea of a sky god, showing him to be nothing more than a bully with a big battery. You rule through fear, Percy shouted, his voice cutting through the roar of the storm. As he dodged another furious strike. You demand obedience because you are strong, not because you are right. Right is what I say it is. Zeus bellowed, grabbing a massive chunk of the shattered causeway and hurling it at Percy. Percy sliced the boulder in two with a clean arc of riptide, the pieces flying past him. That is the logic of a tyrant. And the age of tyrants is over. With a final, explosive burst of speed, he closed the distance between them. Zeus swung wildly, his movements clumsy with rage. Percy ducked under the god's arm, placed his palm flat against the center of Zeus's chest, and unleashed his will. It was not a blast of power meant to destroy. It was an injection of truth. He used his Stygian authority, the power over bonds and consequences, and forced Zeus to feel the weight of every broken oath he had ever sworn. He felt the pain of every hero he had sent to their death, the grief of every mortal woman he had ruined, the resentment of every child he had abandoned. He was forced to confront the millennia of his own hypocrisy, his own failures, his own monumental pride. Zeus screamed, a sound of pure, spiritual agony. Electrical energy around him sputtered and died. His massive form shrank, collapsing in on itself until he was just a man, an old man with a gray beard and eyes filled with a terror that was not of a king, but of a soul that has been judged and found wanting. He fell to his knees before Percy, weeping, his power broken not by a superior force, but by the weight of his own history. Percy stood over him, breathing heavily. He had won. He raised Riptide, the celestial bronze glinting in the chaotic light. The remaining loyalist gods watched, horrified, expecting the final, killing blow, the AC of usurpation that would make Percy the new Kronos. But Percy lowered his sword. Death is too easy for you, he said, his voice quiet but carrying across the now silent battlefield. You don't deserve the peace of oblivion. You deserve a lesson. He reached out and touched Zeus's forehead. A faint, golden light, the last vestiges of the god's divine spark, flowed from Zeus and into Percy's hand. He did not absorb it. He held it, a glittering ball of captive power, and then cast it into the sky, where it shot off like a fading star. You are no longer a god, Percy declared. You are a man. Go, live among them, learn their fear, learn their hope, learn what it means to be mortal and helpless. Learn humility. That is your sentence. He turned his back on the weeping, powerless old Ma, and who had once been the king of the gods. The war was over. The remaining Olympian forces, their king defeated, their morale shattered, threw down their weapons. The battle for Aegis was won. Days later, a new council was convened. It was not held in the throne room on Olympus, but in the open-air amphitheater of Aegis, the sky a brilliant, clear blue above them. In attendance were the remaining Olympians, humbled and leaderless. There were emissaries from Asgard, Odin himself looking on with his single, knowing eye. Carter and Sadie Kane were there, representing the House of Life. Even Hades had come, a rare visit from the underworld, a flicker of grudging respect in his dark eyes. And there were the leaders of Aegis, Annabeth, Nico, Thor, and the representatives of the demigods who had fought and bled for this day. Percy stood in the center. He wore no crown, carried no scepter. The age of prophecy is over, he began, his voice calm and clear. The age of divine monarchy is over. What comes next is up to us. All of us. He did not declare himself a god king. He did not demand their fealty. He proposed a new order. I propose a council of pantheons. A coalition of worlds, governed not by a single, absolute ruler, but by a covenant. A set of laws we all agree to. The first law: no being, mortal or divine, shall have their life dictated by a pre-written fate. The second law: no pantheon shall interfere in the affairs of another without the consent of this council. The third law: mortals are not pawns. Their worlds are their own. We will be their guardians, not their masters. He looked out at the assembled beings of power. There will be disagreements. There will be disputes. And there will need to be an enforcer. An impartial judge to mediate and, when necessary, to act. A guardian of the covenant. He paused, his sea-green eyes sweeping over them all. I will be that guardian. He was not claiming a throne. He was accepting a responsibility. He would be the king, not of a people or a place, but of the new law itself. His power, born of will and forged in sacrifice, would be the shield that protected this new, fragile freedom. There was a long silence. Then, one by one, they gave their assent. Odin nodded solemnly. Carter Kane, speaking for the Egyptians, agreed to the terms. Even Athena, her pride wounded but her wisdom intact, inclined her head in acceptance. A new world had been born. Not from conquest, but from a revolution of philosophy. That evening, Percy and Annabeth stood on the highest tower of the completed citadel of Aegis. The ISL, and below was alive with light and celebration. The war was over. They had won. She leaned her head against his shoulder, her hand finding his. You did it, she whispered, her voice full of a weary, profound awe. You actually did it. No, he said, turning to look at her, his expression serious. We did it. He squeezed her hand. You are the architect, Annabeth. I may have laid the foundation, but you are the one who will build this new world. I'm just the guy who keeps the monsters away from the construction site. She smiled, a true, brilliant smile that reached her eyes. I can live with that. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the stars begin to appear in the darkening sky. They were clearer now, more brilliant, without the filter of the mist. Percy looked up at them, but he saw them differently now. The destruction of the loom and his journey through the raw chaos of reality had given him a new perspective. He saw them not just as distant suns, but as other stories, other realities. Other universes with their own gods, their own rules, their own chains. His work, he realized, was not over. It had only just begun. He was the guardian of this world's freedom, the king of his new order. But the whispers of Erebus were a cold memory in the back of his mind, a reminder that the absence of order could be a weapon in itself. The void was patient, and the universe, was so much larger than he had ever imagined. Annabeth felt him tense. What is it? He smiled down at her, a genuine, easy grin, the first one she had seen in a long, long time. It was the smile of the boy she had met at 12. But it now held the wisdom of a king and the strength of a god. Nothing, he said, just thinking about the next chapter. Chapter 10 N.